Chapter 984. When Song Ing reacted, Luochio's figure had completely disappeared into the bottomless abyss below. It was too late for her to stop him. Song Haoran! Song Ing shouted in horror at the only person she could rely on in this mirror world. What should we do? Wait. Song Haoran said calmly at this time, and at the same time glanced at Araya. Since even she has to accept accept Luochio's orders, what do we have to worry about? But this. Song Ing still wanted to say something. But Song Haoran shook his head, motioning Song Ing to be quiet. After all, as a parent, Song Ing nodded helplessly in the end, even though she was often not very dignified. But she stared at the abyss, and the worry on her face grew stronger. She had a lot of questions that she wanted to ask clearly. Suddenly, Song Ing finally understood why Luochio had no interest in staying in the Song family. If he had such an incredible power behind him, then how insignificant was the Song family to him? Song Haoran suddenly walked towards Araya with his hands behind his back. The young master of the Song family who had been courting death looked quite relaxed at this time. Of course, he was not as frivolous as he usually was when hitting on women. Leia. Song Haoran finally came in front of Araya, smiled and said, "This should be the Sanskrit pronunciation of the name Araya, right?" The blue-haired girl floated up at this time, her body slowly turned, facing Song Haoran, but she did not speak. Song Haoran suddenly became so serious that Song Ing felt that he was not her uncle. He said, "Can I keep the memory of this time?" When Song Haoran's question came out, Song Ing abruptly turned around. She remembered some words that Araya had said. All of this would be erased, the rules would be restarted, and the memories of all related people would be modified. A negative, request denied. You must not divulge anything about the mirror image world and your own administrator. Song Haoran seemed to have known that Araya would give such an answer. He wasn't surprised. Instead, he said boldly, "What if this is Luochio's request? Will you erase our memories of this time?" Araya slowly said, "A negative. The origin, authority did not issue a specific command." Song Haoran still appeared quite relaxed. He even smiled and said, "But how do you know that he won't give this order? You see, he's not here for the time being. You and I can't be sure of this, right?" Araya was silent, and the faint blue light in his pupils once again slowly dispersed, as if he was thinking. Song Haoran struck while the iron was hot. "Of course, I'm not sure if I'll agree to this. I'm worried that he won't agree, but you're worried that he will." Araya suddenly said, "A negative. The origin authority has the right to issue any command to the sub-administrator. The command must be obeyed. The sub-administrator, Araya, number 003, does not need to worry." Song Haoran was stunned and then said helplessly, "Then I'm the only one worried. But for now, you and I can't be sure of this. This is certain, right?" Araya nodded for the first time. "Agreed." Song Haoran finally showed a smile on his face. "So, before he comes back, at least we have to wait until he comes back before we can make a decision. Then, as for the current situation, we can only keep the original status quo, right?" Araya didn't say anything. Song Haoran seemed to have succeeded in his scheme, and his eyes slightly curved. But he didn't know that Song Ing was actually worried to death at this moment. This was not the kind of harmless little girl that one could see on the street. Araya had all kinds of incredible powers and could even directly create people. Song Death-Seeking Haoran really deserved his reputation. Song Haoran turned back and gave Song Ing a reassuring look, and then continued to look at Araya and said, "There's one thing I'm very curious about. Just now, the few Qiao Ans mentioned that they had met you in other spacetime. And you have a serial number, so can I assume that in different spacetime, there are the same you, but with different serial numbers?" Araya didn't answer. Song Haoran just smiled. "Then I can assume that this guess is correct, right? Then, how many are there in total?" Araya still didn't answer, but this time she made another move. She stretched out her arm towards Song Howren and opened her palm. Song Howren's heart suddenly jumped, but he was used to seeing big scenes, so he had already trained himself to remain calm even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. He asked in a low voice, "Did I ask something I shouldn't ask? If so, I apologize and promise not to ask related questions. How about it?" Bang! There was a sudden explosion. Song Howren suddenly released his hands behind his back, and his expression changed slightly. The source of the explosion was his hands behind his back, the mobile phone in his hand. Song Howren looked at the fragments of the mobile phone that had exploded and scattered on the ground, and his smile suddenly turned into a bitter smile. Who said that little girls were easy to fool? There was no light here, and no source of light could be seen, but it was very clear here, but everything was dyed with dark colors. Sound seemed to be able to spread here, but there was no air here, showing a state of complete vacuum. But what was more amazing was that in this vacuum environment, the human body didn't even feel pressure, and there was no difficulty in breathing. It should be said that one didn't even need to breathe here to survive quite well, because the concept of time didn't exist here. The crevice of the dimension, where time stopped forever. After falling from the abyss entrance of the mirror image world, Luocio let his body fall freely. Although time didn't exist here, his personal feelings were still there. At this moment, the number that Luocio silently counted in his heart had reached 203. He finally stopped falling, and now his feet were standing on a piece of wasteland floating in this seemingly rootless dark space. If the resistance of the mirror image world to Luocio's direct contact with the club was like adding a sponge in the transmission of radio waves, then in this dimensional crevice, this resistance was like adding two sponges. In fact, the signal was almost full, so there was nothing to worry about. It should be here. Luocio looked at the position above his head. He fell vertically and landed here, so the person who fell from the steel platform should also be at this position. Of course, if the existence of this dimensional crevice was constantly changing, then the situation might have changed. Luocio tried to check the surrounding environment, then suddenly looked in one direction. Is it here? He was about to look in the direction he was looking, but at this moment, behind Luocio, a huge figure suddenly appeared. There was no light here, only visible things, so there was no shadow. Otherwise, Luocio would be covered by the huge shadow of this figure. Luocio sensed something and turned around. At the same time, a huge roar sounded. In front of him was a monster dozens of times larger than the extinct dinosaurs. Its appearance was like the Western bone dragon in fantasy novels, but its body, especially the exposed bones, had dark brown muscle tissue. In the head like a triceratops, the huge bloody mouth had opened, and the sound came from there. Not only that, but there were also countless similar creatures behind this huge monster. It was just that they were much smaller than this huge monster. However, they were densely packed, as if they were innumerable, but they were far more terrifying than this huge monster. The huge number seemed to have overwhelmed the quality. You are the creatures in the dimensional crevice that Araya mentioned. Void original devil? Luocio looked up and sized them up. The structure of these creatures was very strange, which gave him an indescribable feeling. It was Luocio's first time entering the dimensional crevice, so he didn't know anything about it. But the moment he stepped into the dimensional crevice, he felt as if he had entered the third floor of the club, the room where the altar was. It was similar, yet different, which gave him a very subtle feeling. But now wasn't the time to think about it, because this huge monster in front of him, as well as those countless small creatures behind it, their target was probably Luocio himself. Be quiet, I'm just here to find a few people, Luocio said indifferently. But this huge monster in front of him suddenly roared, its bloody mouth suddenly stretched down. As long as it bit down, Luocio's body would be directly bitten into two. I said be quiet. It was as if someone had pressed the pause button on the video. The gigantic monster still had its mouth open. However, it suddenly stopped. This situation lasted for about 10 seconds. Time didn't seem to flow here, and to estimate the time, one could only rely on one's senses. It retracted its neck bit by bit, and then retreated step by step. Not long after, this huge monster was already far away from Luaccio. Because of its huge ears and body, every step it took would cover a very long distance. After this huge monster was a certain distance away, it directly lay on the ground, and then fell into a deep sleep, and at this time, this huge monster's body began to change. It seemed that its whole body had turned into a rock, and those small creatures that stayed in the air flew down one by one into the rock mountain that this huge monster had turned into. They attached themselves to this huge rock mountain, and also turned into various small rocks of different shape. At this time, looking from afar, it would only be seen as an inconspicuous rock mountain, and no one would know that it was actually a terrifying and huge monster. "I'm just here to find a few people, and I'll leave once I find them." At this time, Luaccio looked at this huge rock mountain in the distance and said indifferently, "When I leave, I'll probably leave from this position, so please be quiet for a while." But the rock mountain seemed to have really turned into a rock, and no longer made any sound. "Then, I won't disturb you." Luaccio turned around, and with a little force, he let his body directly jump away from this floating wasteland. There's almost no gravity here, and Luaccio disappeared from this wasteland just like that. Not long after, because time did not flow here, and one could only rely on one's senses, probably not long after, two more figures slowly fell from above into this huge floating wasteland. One was a man, and the other was a woman. The man was about 30 years old. His skin was dark, and his body was strong, giving people a huge pressure. The woman, on the other hand, was exuding a delicate aura. Her every frown and smile seemed to be able to steal people's souls. It should be here. The fluctuation just now. The woman looked around at this time. Judging from this fluctuation, it should be at least a complete body of the progenitor of void. The man nodded at this time, and at the same time looked around. This area is considered a wasteland in the crevice. How could there be a complete body of the progenitor of void? Who knows? The woman stretched at this time. Not only the delicate aura, but also the laziness that she exuded at this moment could stimulate male instincts to the maximum. Even the man, who was her companion, slightly moved his eyes at this moment. At this time, the woman gently covered her mouth, and there seemed to be a spring in her eyes. "Oh, I didn't expect that King Solomon, who is praised by the world, would be shy." The man named Solomon frowned slightly at this time, slightly dissatisfied. But his eyes soon fell on a huge rock mountain that was about to float in this wasteland, and Solomon quickly said, "Dodgy, if you want to joke, leave it for next time. The target has been found." With that, Solomon directly jumped out and landed directly in front of this huge rock mountain. The woman smiled slightly, looked at the man's back, and yawned lazily again. "What an unromantic man. It really makes me miss the past. Joe." She immediately shook her head, knowing that what she thought in her heart was unrealistic. Even if time stopped in this place, it couldn't be reversed. Then, she lightly jumped out and quickly came to Solomon's side. But at this time, Solomon was standing in front of this huge rock mountain, motionless, and no one knew what he was thinking. "Seems like a guy who is very good at hiding." The woman, Dodgy, looked up at this time and looked at the end of this rock mountain. Could it be that it often disguises itself as a mountain and then hunts? If that's the case, Solomon? She frowned, looked at her companion beside her, and saw that he was also frowning and staring at this rock mountain. "Solomon, what happened?" "It's afraid." At this time, Solomon put his hand on a rock at the bottom of the mountain, and then turned to look at Dodgy. Without a doubt, it's trembling, as if it's afraid of something. Finally, the extremely delicate woman opened her small mouth in shock. She knew that creatures like the void original demons had no emotions, and were creatures that only acted on instinct. Then, what could it be that could make the primordial ancestor of the void, a high-level being among the primordial demons of the void, afraid and even tremble? What's even more unbelievable is, Solomon said solemnly, I'm already touching it, but it's not reacting at all. Daji, have you ever seen such a well-behaved progenitor of the void? Chapter 985. At this moment, Daji also pressed her palm against this huge, stone mountain, feeling the trembling that Solomon said. She was silent for a while, although the trembling from her palm was very light, for the fearless primordial void demons, fear and terror were probably inconceivable things. If they really found something, or even someone, that could make a creature like the primordial void demon afraid, it would be one of the most important discoveries they had made since they had been stationed in this crack for so long. Feeling fear meant being scared. What could make one feel scared? Probably only the existence of a natural enemy. But, is there really something that can make a primordial void demon afraid? Daji was skeptical. She shook her head and said, Ever since I came here, I've never seen one. There is. Solomon said slowly, I once talked with one of the lords in the throne room and heard her mention a creature called the primordial void demon. Daji, what is the limit of the primordial void demon that you know? That should be not long after I came here. Daji recalled, the first time I participated in a crusade against the primordial void demons, there were 7 ultimate void demon gods. That battle was quite tragic. 4 of our companions had fallen. But later on, I heard that there are even more terrifying primordial void demons above the ultimate void demon gods, but I've never seen one. Solomon nodded. That is a creature called the Void Shura. Actually, the crusade against the void demon gods you participated in was only the aftermath of the great battle. About 100 years before you came, we were fighting a truly terrifying Void Shura. The ones you attacked later were the remnants of this Void Ashura's subordinates. Daji opened her mouth slightly. The mature primordial devil of void, the complete form of the primordial ancestor of void, and then the ultimate form of the void demon god. The void demon god is already at the level of us transcendents, so wouldn't the Void Shura be? No. Solomon shook his head. The power of the Void Shura wouldn't surpass that of the void demon gods by much. In terms of power, the two of them should be on the same level. The difference between the two is that the Void Ashura already possesses intelligence and seems to have an innate ability to control the void demon god. Generals and commanders. Daji nodded and said, So, the thing that this void progenitor is afraid of is the Void Shura? Probably. Solomon nodded. After all, the Void Ashura is the limit of what I have seen. But what? One of the thrones, Sir Red Cloud, said so. Solomon said seriously, even the Void Ashura might not be the limit of this kind of creature. If there was such a limit, then he could be called a void god. If there really is a virtual god in the crevice of the dimension, there won't be any space for us to survive. Daji couldn't help but smile bitterly. Why do I feel that even if we transcend the main world, it's still so dangerous? What we can see might not be the limit of what we know. As a transcendent being, could it be that you still don't understand this? Solomon said calmly, because of this, we are explorers step by step. With the help of the Ark's ability, we continue to travel in this dimensional clip, hoping to reach the original world. This seemed to be a rather heavy topic. Daji suddenly chuckled. Maybe there really is a Void Shura passing by, and that's why it's so scared? But if we really encounter a Void Shura, I'm afraid it's not something we can handle. So, why are we still waiting here? Don't forget our mission this time. Let's hurry up and capture this primordial void progenitor. Yes, you're right. Solomon nodded. Daji chuckled. In order to save Lord Noah, the thrones have prepared a big gift for heaven. I wonder if those pure petitioners and puppet-like battle angels will show some interesting expressions when a large number of primordial void demons appear in heaven? Solomon didn't say anything. Before this woman became a transcendent, She seemed to be a demon concubine who liked to look for fun. But this was indeed an order from the thrones, and Solomon didn't intend to disobey. Therefore, he took a deep breath and suddenly punched the huge stone mountain. Many floating boulders floated around him. Some were the size of a football field, and some were only about 2 to 3 meters in diameter. These tiny boulders seemed to have been split from a huge wasteland below. They were like stars surrounding this huge wasteland. And this wasteland was also the place where Luocio had landed. On the wasteland there were many potholes which seemed to be caused by something. It seemed that there had been an inhuman battle on this wasteland. Luocio found half of the primordial void demon's body on the ground. Perhaps because there was no concept of time and love, this half of the primordial void demon's body hadn't rotted. At this moment, a miserable cry suddenly came from behind a tall stalagmite not far away. Luocio glanced at it and quickly walked over. When he bypassed this stalagmite, Luocio saw Joan, or one of Joan's. It was the sweater Joan. At this moment, the sweater Joan had fallen to the ground, her face twisted in pain, her body, her entire lower body, had disappeared. To be exact, the lower half of her body was being swallowed by a huge mouth at this moment. This was a huge creature like a sandworm, and its aura was the same as the primordial void demon Luocio had encountered when he first arrived. The primordial void demon should have all kinds of forms. This giant worm's mouth was round, and a large number of densely packed and sharp teeth were exposed. As the teeth moved, it kept swallowing the sweater Joan's body into its mouth. Save me! The sweater Joan had experienced a lot of fear at this moment. She stretched out her hand towards Luocio. Luocio glanced at her. Aurea had said that if one fell into the dimensional crevice, they would probably end up as food for the primordial void demon. It seemed that he was right. Save me, many times. Luocio looked at the sweater Joan's despairing eyes and pained expression. Life and soul are both priceless. But if you insist, it seems that the soul is much more important. Life and soul should be unequal. Then, the sweater Joan's gaze gradually faded. Then, you who have lost your life, what can you use to get your soul back? Luocio said indifferently. And you who have also lost your soul, what can you use to exchange for your life? The sweater Joan's gaze finally faded, and she completely gave up struggling. And at this moment, her body was eaten by the primordial void demon behind her. Her lips moved slightly, as if she was saying something, as if she was saying, "Why?" Not because of anything. Luocio looked at her remaining head and sighed. Time and space should be relative. In this infinite time and space that has been derived, if there are as many unlucky you as there are lucky you, just like the many time and space that you have jumped to, the Joan in those times and spaces are probably all lucky, and have a life that people can only dream of. Since you have already obtained happiness once, why do you want to jump again? If you feel that the original time and space is unfair to you, or even abandoning you, then, from the first time you jumped, it was a chance that fate gave you. The sweater Joan opened her mouth and cried loudly. Tears instantly burst out of her eyes, and her eyes were finally covered by the primordial void demon's mouth. She had been completely swallowed into the primordial void demon's body. In the end, it still can't be changed. Luocio slowly exhaled and was silent for a moment. At this moment, the primordial void demon that had swallowed the sweater Joan didn't seem to be satisfied. The dense teeth in its huge open mouth moved continuously with the help of the muscles in its gums. Go to sleep when you are full. Luocio waved his hand. Actually, your lives are already very happy. Sleep when you are full, and only come out to look for food when you are hungry. Don't think too much. The primordial void demon suddenly extended its body, and when that long body rose into the air, it suddenly shot downwards. Rumble! It didn't attack Luocio, but crashed headfirst into the wasteland. Not long after, it drilled directly into the ground, leaving behind a large pitch-black crater. Luocio wasn't surprised that the primordial void demon would retreat, But he suddenly glanced at the edge of the crater. There was a small dot of light that suddenly flashed past. The Eye of Horus ring. That was probably the Sweater Jones ring. Luocio picked up the Eye of Horus ring. In the end, the Sweater Joan had intended to use the ring's ability to jump. It was a pity that the ring's remaining power was very weak. Not to mention leaving this dimensional crevice, it couldn't jump smoothly even in Luocio's dimension. Luocio kept the ring. There were a total of 3 people who fell into the dimensional crevice from the mirror world. Now that the Sweater Joan had been directly devoured by the primordial void demon, only the white-clothed Joan and Paul were left. It was just that there were innumerable unusual passageways within the dimensional crevice, and those passageways seemed to connect to different parts of the dimensional crevice. In other words, there was no such thing as coordinates in the dimensional crevice, with all places or many places in a state of overlapping yet separate from each other. At one moment, one's location might be very close, but the next moment, one might be very far away. But since it was a dimensional crevice, it meant that there were passages leading to many different dimensions. Just like how number 003 Araya could open a passage from the mirror world to make Joan and Paul fall, there were probably ways to open passages leading to different dimensions in this dimensional crevice. You don't seem to be from here. Are you new here? Suddenly, a soft voice came from above. Luocio turned around unhurriedly and looked up. What he saw seemed to be a bright red flower, a delicate and beautiful figure like a red flower. Graceful and charming, with a graceful figure, waist-length hair, dressed in red, skin whiter than snow, a sword at his waist, with a sword tassel hanging down naturally. It was a jade pendant with 2 fishes, which could be described as valiant and formidable. But this was a man. There was no doubt that this was a man, because he had an Adam's apple and was dressed in ancient clothing. Well, I came here to look for something. If I find it, it's almost time to go back. Luocio looked up and replied. The beautiful man showed an interested gaze. He landed lightly from the stalagmite he was standing on and walked towards Luocio. The man casually hung his hand on the sword at his waist, looking somewhat casual, but at the same time very seductive. Was this really a man? Luocio couldn't help but take a few more glances. Very few people would take the initiative to come here. The beautiful man revealed a smile. Those who come here are either unable to stay in their original place, or are exiled sinners. You, which one are you? Luocio shook his head and thought for a moment before saying, Probably not. Are you such a person? Now I am, not in the past and in the future. He paused, his fingers rubbing his long hair as he looked at the endless grayness. He said softly, The future is hard to say. Although there are countless contemporaries that lead to other spacetimes here, and different spacetimes have different processes, they may or may not be the same, but you have never been able to find anything that can help you in other spacetimes. Do you know why? Luocio just shook his head. The man's gaze was very special, evoking some unpleasant memories in Luocio, as well as a certain fellow who had awakened his murderous intent. The gay vampire he encountered in the cellar maze of Tushani's Wine Manor, Hidasil. Because even if there are countless of you in other spacetimes, they are still not you. The man chuckled. Only you are eternal. Luocio somewhat agreed with the man's words. But was it really appropriate for this person to suddenly appear and say these words? It was unknown if it was because the recent holidays had been too long, but Luocio's awkwardness seemed to be showing signs of recovery. He suddenly had the urge to get this man away from him as soon as possible. I'm very happy to meet you. The man smiled faintly, like an elegant young master, but also like a stunning beauty, making it difficult to distinguish his gender. This monarch's name is Long Yang, may I ask? Oh, Long Yang Jun. Luocio nodded. Long Yang Jun? Wasn't this the first famous gay recorded in the history of China? The main body of Long Yang's hobby? Have you heard of me, little brother? Long Yangjuan's eyes lit up and he took a step closer to Luocio. Probably. Luocio casually replied, then glanced at the man who called himself Long Yangjuan's current position. If he were to take another step forward, he would have to be on full alert. Judging from his previous experience of being attacked by Citasil, he would need to be on full alert. Yen. Chapter 986. You seem to have heard of me, little brother? Long Yangjuan's question was very direct, as if he really wanted to know if he was really recognized. Probably. I've read about you in the history books, Luocio answered after thinking for a while. The main reason was that Long Yangjun didn't intend to go any further, and this distance just happened to be outside Luocio's range of vigilance. Long Yangjun nodded and said with melancholy, "The last time I left the crevice, it happened to be the Jingguan era. I wonder what era you're in now, little brother?" Jingguan? Luocio was slightly startled. That's right. Long Yangjun nodded and then asked rather concernedly, "I wonder if you've heard of Li Taibai." Li what? Luocio blinked. Long Yangjun said with nostalgia, "Li Taibai, also known as householder Qing Lian, is one of the most talented people I've ever seen in my life. Multicolored horses, 1,000 gold cloaks, a whimper will be exchanged for good wine, and with you, we'll dispel the worries of the ages, the worries of the ages." He seemed to be chanting, and his eyes gradually became gentle. Toasting with Brother Taibai under the moonlight and getting drunk was really a great joy in life. At that time, the moonlight was so beautiful. There really wasn't anything wrong with the moonlight. What's the relationship between you two? Don't put on such a shy face. Hey, I keep feeling that if I continue to ask, all the modern language textbooks for elementary, middle, and high school will be torn up. Sorry, I've only read about it in the history books, Luocio said indifferently. My era was more than 1,000 years away from the Jingguan era. Long Yangjun sighed slowly. Suddenly, tears welled up in his eyes, revealing a kind of melancholy and lingering aura, as if there were thousands of knots in his heart. This is a man. However, Long Yangjuan's melancholy soon disappeared, and a bright smile returned. I've made a fool of myself in the past, little brother. But it's almost time. Let's take a look at the situation of this primordial void demon. Primordial void demon? Startled, Luocio subconsciously turned back to look at the deep pit left by the strange worm after it burrowed into the wasteland. That's right. Long Yangjun nodded and then said seriously, Primordial void demon is a creature unique to this place. But little brother, do you know how it was formed? I'd like to hear the details. Lord Long Yang said, they are the manifestation of the obsessions of all living beings after they die. After becoming a primordial void demon, they no longer have their original thoughts and feelings. Although they had transformed into another type of individual, their obsessions when they were alive still hadn't dissipated. It was as if a hole had appeared in his heart. They desperately needed to devour something to fill the hole. However, this hole didn't originally belong to the primordial void demon, but its body when it was alive. Therefore, this hole exists, but also doesn't exist. Therefore, no matter how much the primordial void demon devours, it can't fill this hole. They can only repeat their instincts and carry out their activities. After Long Yangjun finished speaking, a slight vibration suddenly came from the deep pit in front of them, as if something was surging out from below. It had a thick and long body, just like the huge strange worm Luocio had seen not long ago. However, this thing's body was covered with fine scales. It didn't look like a worm anymore. It looked like a snake. However, what was even stranger was that the head of this huge snake had turned into Qiao An's appearance. Her body was almost seamlessly connected with the original primordial void demon. Or rather, the lower half of Qiao An's body had completely turned into a huge and thick tongue. At the same time, her arms and body were also covered with fine scales. What a filthy true soul! Long Yangjun looked up at this moment. It actually became the dominant one. Little brother, you said you were looking for something. Are you looking for this person? Luocio looked at Xiao An's new form after the fusion with the primordial void demon, and suddenly asked, "Is it possible for the devoured true soul to take over the original primordial void demon?" Long Yangjun nodded. "Yes, but it's rare. After all, the formation of the primordial void demon doesn't happen overnight. It's not easy for a newcomer to take over the original one. Well, judging from the fluctuation of its aura, this new primordial void demon is about to transform into a mature primordial ancestor of the void. It's just been fused and it's already grown to such an extent. It seems that its growth potential is very good." After turning into the primordial void demon, Xiao En's eyes had turned into the eyes of a snake. The fingers on her hands turned into sharp short blades, and under her lips, sharp and long fangs were exposed. "Little brother, can you give this primordial void demon to me?" Long Yangjun suddenly asked. Luocio cast a puzzled look at him. Long Yangjun, however, slowly pulled out the sword at his waist and pointed it at the primordial void demon in front of him. He smiled and said, "It's just a small mission. Each of us needs to bring back some primordial void demons and primordial ancestors of the void. This is only a mutant, but it's comparable to many ordinary primordial void demons. It can really save us a lot of trouble." Long Yangjun chuckled again at this moment. He turned back and said coquettishly, "Little brother, you're new here, so it's not surprising that you don't know many things. After this, you can come to my place and I'll clear up your doubts. And I'd like to have a long talk with you, little brother, so that we can get to know the local customs of this world. Let's deal with it first." Luocio looked at the primordial void demon ambiguously. Long Yangjun smiled at Luocio again and leaped out. His crimson robe was like a blooming red flower, and the charm of his sword blossomed at the same time. It was said that Long Yangjun of the Wei Kingdom was a talented swordsman who possessed extraordinary swordsmanship. Well, Luocio didn't know any swordsmanship, but he still took a few more glances. At this moment, Lord Long Yang had leaped onto a huge stalagmite, standing alone with his sword in hand. Facing this primordial void devil, which was dozens of times larger than him, he was completely fearless. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of sword seals exploded on the body of the primordial void demon, with the head of a human and the body of a snake. The primordial void demon let out a shrill cry. Luocio could no longer find Wei Xiaoen's face on the primordial void demon's face. He just watched quietly as the primordial void demon was not completely killed by Long Yangjuan's swordsmanship. It seemed that Long Yangjuan's words about capturing it alive were true. The crevice between dimensions should be the main camp of those transcendents. Long Yangjun was probably one of them. Although he was indeed curious as to why those transcendents captured the primordial void demon, Luocio didn't intend to let Song Haoran and Song Ying wait too long in the mirror image world. He had a feeling that Song Haoran would stir up some trouble given his temperament. Rumble! When the gigantic primordial devil with a human head and a snake body finally fell to the ground powerlessly and kept howling, Lord Long Yang finally put his sword back into its sheath. He flipped his drooping hair and chuckled. Then he opened his 5 fingers, and a black hole instantly sucked the primordial void demon into it. Long Yangjun smiled with satisfaction and jumped down from the stalagmite. "Little brother, sorry to keep you waiting. Where is he?" When he landed, there was no trace of Luocio. Lord Long Yang looked around in astonishment, only to find that there was no trace of him at all. He didn't even notice when this little brother had left. Looks like this little brother is really outstanding in his own way. Long Yangjun lowered his head and smiled, muttering to himself, "I'm really looking forward to our next encounter. I haven't met such an attractive man for a long time." As he spoke, Lord of Long Yang suddenly slapped his own forehead with a regretful look on his face. I actually forgot to ask for his name." After leaving quietly, Luocio quickly moved to another huge floating wasteland. He used some tricks when he left, so Long Yongjun probably couldn't find him. Even so, Luochio still didn't feel good. If the body constitution that always attracted accidents was activated after he became the club owner, then what the hell was the body constitution of men who were interested in men recently? However, Luochio soon found Joan in White, who had fallen from the mirror image world on this new wasteland. She was much luckier than Joan in that she didn't meet the primordial void demon after she fell. When Luochio found her, Joan in White was wandering alone on this wasteland. She didn't give up looking for Paul. She might not even know that Paul had been thrown into the dimensional crack in the end. It was likely that this kind of action had already exceeded the level of normal thinking that she could achieve. Luochio followed behind Joan in White, watching her wander for a long distance. In the end, Qiaoan suddenly stopped walking and found a place to sit down. She buried her face between her knees and hugged her legs tightly. Everything around her was dark, without day or night. She was alone. Later, she seemed to hear some footsteps. She slowly raised her head and shouted anxiously, "Paul, it's you." What surprised Qiaoan was that the person she met was the mysterious young man who had seen through her true identity. "Why are you also? I don't think I woke you up." Luochio came to Joan in White, looking down at her. There was some dust on her face, which should have been from this wasteland. The muddy dust and tears had smeared her beautiful face, like melted makeup. Joan in White was indeed a delicate beauty, no matter which space and time. Were you also thrown down?" Luochio looked at Joan in White in surprise. If his memory wasn't messed up, she should have heard the conversation between him and Araya. If she understood the meaning of his conversation with Araya, she should know that Araya would never throw Luochio down. Seeing Luochio's expression, Joan in White had to apologize. "I'm sorry, I didn't pay attention to you at that time. I saw that Paul was too scared, so I thought about how to calm him down." In other words, she didn't listen or care at all. In her world, under such a shocking change, she only paid attention to Paul. Luochio slowly squatted down, took out a white handkerchief, and wiped the dirt on Joan's face. "Now, do you have an answer?" Joan in White was stupefied. She didn't know how long she had been wandering in this wasteland, but she felt physically and mentally exhausted, so she forced herself to sit down and take a rest. Luochio began to wipe the dirt on the other side of her face. Joan in White moved her lips in vain. "It doesn't matter," Luochio said softly. "It's quiet here, and the quietness makes people calm down. You don't have to know the answer." "Then Paul." She vaguely expected something. "I didn't see him when I came down," Luochio said. The white-clothed Qiaoan heaved a sigh of relief before curling up once again. Although the dirt on her face had been wiped clean, she still looked tired. She said faintly, "I don't know how Paul is now. Will she treat him well?" "Do you think she won't treat him well?" Luochio suddenly asked. Joan in White shook her head. "I don't know, but, if it's me," she shook her head again, and then looked at Luochio with a wry smile. "In fact, I have seen many Pauls." Luochio listened attentively. Joan in White whispered, Some of them are just born, and their eyes haven't opened yet. Some of them have already learned how to walk and jump around." She subconsciously grabbed Luochio's arm, and her eyes sparkled with pride. "They are all excellent, some like painting, some like singing." She smiled. "Some of them are as old as Paul, they can laugh, walk, and are very naughty, and they will smile at me. When they smile at me, they even—" Joan in White seemed to realize that these were far away, and she soon became silent. She still shook her head. "But they are not my Paul. I know, they are not my Paul, they all have their own mothers." Luochio sat down. "You know what? When you asked me, am I really the child's mother? I was really scared." Joan in White put her chin on her knees and looked ahead. "I was scared. I was scared that I couldn't find him again." "So you appeared in front of Paul at the airport?" Luochio looked at Joan. "Because you know, his real mother is not here." "I didn't mean it." She looked at Luochio, hesitating. I just I really don't intend to steal other people's children. Because I know the pain of losing a child. I just want to see him again. I always feel that, I always think, if on the day of the accident, Paul also made the same leap as me. I have been telling myself this, and I can only tell myself this. She was already sad, and even sobbing. I can find him, I will find him, he has been waiting for me. Please give me an answer, okay? Lucio suddenly asked softly. In a trance, Joan in white moved her lips. If I can, I would rather jump in different time and space until the day I can find him. I think, maybe I will go crazy? Am I stupid? Lucio looked at her, turned the handkerchief to a clean place, and then gently touched the tears on her face. You have jumped in many different time and space and seen many children. There is no doubt that if you can be like her and be willing to replace one of so many time and space, maybe you are already happy, right? Xiao En's lips were slightly puckered and trembling. Luocio's voice became softer. But you have never done this, right? Even if the child is more important than your life to you, you are not willing to take away someone else's child. Lucio raised his hand, and there was a glimmer of light in his palm, and then it gradually expanded. In the white and holy light there was the initial form of a life. Although all the facial features were not clearly seen, and the 4 limbs were not clearly grown, there is no doubt that this is a complete life. Joan in white reached out her trembling hand, wanting to touch this small and independent life, but she retreated before she touched it. All of a sudden, she heard the heartbeat of the little creature, which seemed to overlap with her own heartbeat. Her tears were still flowing, but she was also stunned at the same time. He is also Paul, but he has never really seen the world. He is only considered to have been here. Lucio looked at Joan at this time. Time and space are relative. There are many times when you are favored by the lucky lock in time and space. There will be many times when you are entangled by misfortune. Maybe you belong to the unfortunate side, but even so, you don't want to change anything by taking away the life of another lucky Joan. For such a you, even if fate makes you suffer all this, but at least, Lucio smiled and said, at least with me, there is still a part of your luck. So, are you willing to accept it? Why? She looked at the mysterious young man in a daze. Probably because I have more freedom now. With that, Lucio gently pressed the light ball containing the initial life in his palm on Joan in White's abdomen. It merged into Joan in White's body little by little. Joan held her abdomen tightly and was in a daze. Go. Lucio waved his hand at this time. Readjust the scale of luck and misfortune. The lucky side has been destroyed too much, so let the unlucky side make up for it. The world will not do anything to you. The gray color in the dimensional crevice faded from Joan in White's eyes at this moment. As if it was a projection, the desolate land instantly turned green. When she came back to her senses, she was already in a peaceful park. She was sitting on a bench in the park. But she suddenly saw a girl with blue hair and blue eyes in front of her. Araya. This was a world where Joan once existed, but Joan was gone. It belonged to the world of the lucky Joan in many dimensions. Intelligent manager of all things Araya, serial number 041, at your service. A dream? She thought. Chapter 987. When Solomon and Daji found Lord Longyang, he was sitting on the edge of a desolate land. His eyes were closed, and he was playing a musical instrument called shing. Daji was no stranger to shing. She used to live in the palace and had her own team of musicians. She also had a teacher. However, Solomon was curious and couldn't help but look at this strange musical instrument. Although they all lived in the gap between dimensions, the detached ones didn't have a close relationship with each other. If there was no rush between the sovereign stage, they would have been separated. Of course, some of the detached ones had different levels of personal friendship. Solomon knew about Long Yangjuan's existence, but they rarely talked to each other. When they met, they just greeted each other. However, Daji and Long Yongjun had a good relationship in private. Long Yongjun, I've been looking for you many times, hoping that you can play a song for me. Daji smiled. But it's hard to get. What happened today that gave you such a refined mood? Long Yongjun put down the shing, got up, nodded at Daji, and smiled. I'm just expressing my feelings. If you like it, I'll definitely come and play it for you. Daji smiled sweetly. This woman seemed to have a special charm given by God. Even the detached ones couldn't resist it. Most of the time, Solomon could only try his best not to look at Daji's eyes. It wasn't that his willpower wasn't strong enough, but it was because Daji's power came from this pair of eyes that seemed to be able to steal souls. He wasn't the only one. Many detached ones couldn't resist Daji's beauty, especially men. Probably only people like Long Yongjun didn't have such problems. But now wasn't the time to talk. Solomon said seriously, Long Yongjun, I've teamed up with Daji and caught a lot of primordial demons. Not long ago, we met a complete primordial ancestor of the void. We've done more than what the sovereign stage asked us to do. What about you? I didn't expect to meet you here. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to communicate more with Long Yongjun. Although he was already a transcendent being, he was still a great emperor of the human world. Roping in factions was something he was born with. My luck wasn't that good, I only caught one. However, this essence devil is rather interesting. At this moment, Long Yongjun looked at Solomon and gave him a simple explanation of how he had captured the void original demon with a human head and snake body. At this moment, he looked at Solomon, and his eyes lit up slightly. He chuckled and said, "A very good one. In the future, it might be able to go very far as the void original devil. It's really a pity to use it to complete the plan of the sovereigns this time." Haha, that's easy. At this time, Solomon said straightforwardly, I have extra here. Long Yongjun, if you don't mind, I'll give it to you. Thank you so much. Long Yongjun didn't stand on ceremony. He just looked at this once valiant emperor of a foreign country, and his eyes burned with passion. Daji's gaze swept back and forth between the two. Then, she narrowed her eyes, as if waiting for something interesting to happen. Unexpectedly, Long Yongjun suddenly asked at this moment, By the way, are there any new members joining recently? Solomon was startled and said subconsciously, I haven't heard of that. However, some of our companions who were in charge of being guides found some good newcomers a while ago. Among them, the one who was most appreciated by the sovereigns is called Erex. However, he seems to be receiving guidance from Lord Kishadi Nagisa between the sovereigns and hasn't appeared yet. The rest of the newcomers are still in the assessment stage. So, who is the newcomer that Long Yongjun is referring to? Erex? Long Yongjun opened his mouth slightly in surprise. To be able to be appreciated by that lord, it seems like he has great potential. Well, I haven't asked for the name of the one I met. However, I saw that he was very unfamiliar with this dimensional crack. I'm afraid he's not a newcomer who was selected this time. Oh, Daji said with interest, if he didn't go through the guide, then there are only 2 or 3 possibilities for him to come here. Either his own strength has reached the limit and he sensed that he can't continue to stay in the main world, or he accidentally entered some secret crack and entered here by mistake. Long Yongjun recalled, this little brother is very strange. According to him, he came here to look for something. I'm afraid he didn't enter by mistake. In other words, he relied on his own ability? Solomon's eyes suddenly lit up. The sovereigns have always valued the juniors who transcended based on their own abilities. It seems that this news needs to be passed to the sovereigns. Long Yongjun, what does this person look like? For the sovereigns, the development of the brain could no longer be described with common sense. Retentive memory was probably just an instinct. This is simple. Long Yongjun smiled. Perhaps there are many companions who know him. Let me draw a picture. As he spoke, Long Yangjun gently pulled out the sword in his hand and planned to draw with the sword. Long Yangjun closed his eyes and stood still with the sword in his hand. However, after a while, Long Yangjun didn't move at all. Daji had seen Long Yangjun's drawing before. Without a doubt, he could make it lifelike. However, at this moment, she also noticed that something was wrong with Long Yangjun. Long Yangjun, are you in trouble? Daji asked softly. Long Yangjun opened his eyes and looked at his two companions with a strange expression. He frowned and said, I can't remember this little brother's appearance. What? Solomon asked in surprise. Daji was also surprised. I can remember what he said, but his appearance has become very blurry in my memory. Long Yangjun took a deep breath and said, Later, I tried to explore my memory and found that it became more and more blurry. Solomon raised his eyebrows. Could it be that this newcomer has the ability to affect or even change other people's memories? If that's true, it's a very troublesome ability. If that's the case, then hurry up and reach the throne level, Daji suggested at this time. Long Yangjun nodded. Okay. When Luoqiu returned to the bottom of the passage from the mirror image world to the crack of the dimension, the floating wasteland where he originally landed had disappeared. There was nothing around him. Luoqiu didn't find Paul. His intuition told him that if he continued to search in the crack of the dimension, he wouldn't find Paul. However, he didn't die, so there was only one possibility left. His body slowly rose up from the passage. As he gradually left the crack of the dimension, the passage to the mirror image world was quickly closing. When Luoqiu completely left the abyss passage, the surroundings had returned to its original appearance. The abyss passage also returned to its original appearance of the airport hall in the mirror image world. There was not a speck of dust under his feet, and the floor tiles could almost reflect his face. Luoqiu, who had just arrived, heard Song Ying's nervous and anxious cry. Luoqiu followed the sound and found Song Ying standing there in fear. Song Haoran was also here, but at this time, Song Haoran was motionless at this time, Song Haoran had directly turned into a stone statue. He was completely petrified. What happened? Luoqiu came in front of Song Ying and looked at Araya at the same time. Song Ying opened her mouth, but hesitated to speak. However, Araya said without any pressure, answer. The individual is judged to be dangerous. It is recommended that the behavior of the individual be restrained. Luoqiu looked at Song Ying, and Song Ying had no choice but to say, You know Song Haoran's character. He is actually not a bad person. He is just a little curious, and then, he probably asked some questions. She did not dare to say that Song Haoran actually intended to secretly record the conversation. However, after Luoqiu glanced at the fragments of the mobile phone on the ground, he roughly guessed that Song Haoran was only temporarily petrified, and his life was not in danger. A space-time was like a precise clock, and every individual was an indispensable part of this clock. Then, as the sub-manager of this space-time, Araya would not casually destroy any part of this clock. Has the disorder of this space-time been restored? Luoqiu asked Araya. Answer. The factor of disorder has been restored. Luoqiu nodded and suddenly said, Do what you are supposed to do. If there is nothing special, I will not voluntarily enter the mirror world of this space-time. This time, Araya did not respond. He just maintained a silent appearance. Then, Luoqiu suddenly waved at Song Ying and Song Haoran, and the two left the mirror world in an instant. Luoqiu glanced at the place where Han Bingjiang's body was supposed to be. He found that Han Bingjiang's body was gone, presumably it had been disposed. As for Qiaowen, who Araya created again, she had already opened her eyes. However, this Qiaowen's eyes were lifeless, without the slightest bit of spirit, like a puppet. However, ordinary people would not be able to tell when she was officially activated. This was because once she was activated, it meant that she was already an ordinary person in this space-time. Seems like you are quite used to this kind of operation, Luocio said with a smile. Araya said, "I'll answer. This is the 19,235 incident. There are sufficient cases in the database for reference. 19235. Luocio was slightly surprised. For a world with a huge population base, this number was just a drop in the ocean. However, the number that was close to 20,000 was actually not a small number. Luocio pondered slightly. In fact, there was not much that he wanted to know from Araya. But there was one thing. You, other than me, have you seen other origin authority? Luocio looked into Araya's eyes. The light in the blue pupils began to flicker. Luocio noticed that whenever Araya was thinking or analyzing, there would be such a light in his eyes. He waited. Answer, no. No? Luocio was startled. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, if the origin authority requested you to delete a part of your memory, would you comply? Answer, the origin authority is above the sub-administrator. Luocio nodded and did not say anything else. Then, he slowly retreated before Araya's eyes. As he retreated, Luocio's figure gradually disappeared from the mirror image world. In the almost dead silence of the mirror image world, only Araya's voice, which still did not fluctuate, rang. Carry out the follow-up of the correction plan. She raised her hand, and the recreated Joanne began to move. When Song Hauran's senses returned, he found himself in the same airport where he was first pulled into the mirror image world. It was also the place where Han Bingjiang encountered the three different Jonas. Song Ying? Song Hauran instinctively looked at Song Ying. Song Ying shook her head. She was a little flustered and worried. Are you all right? You have no idea that you turned into a stone just now. You really scared me. Song Hauran frowned and then suddenly said, Give me the phone. Why are you still thinking about this? Song Ying was about to scold him when she saw Song Hauran suddenly pinching his sleeve. The wrist on the sleeve was now dripping with blood. Song Ying opened her mouth in surprise. When did you get this? Song Hauran didn't say anything. He just quickly wiped away the blood on the wound. When the blood was wiped away, the meaning of the wound in front of Song Ying became clear. Araya. The wound on the wrist turned out to be this name. Song Hauran secretly engraved this word on his body. Quick, take a picture of the wound. While we can still remember. She said that she would erase our memories. This. Song Ying was a little hesitant at this time. However, she could not resist Song Hauran's eager gaze. She could only take out the phone half-heartedly. Unexpectedly, when Song Ying was about to take the picture, another palm suddenly rested on Song Hauran's wrist. At the same time, Luocio's voice came. Are you hurt? Let me see. Well, it's fine now. When Luocio's palm left, the bleeding wound on Song Hauran's wrist had disappeared. The two looked at Luocio in surprise at the same time. However, at this moment, Luocio put his hand between them and snapped his fingers. The two were absent-minded and stood there quietly. Luocio glanced at Song Hauran, whispering, In the future, you will meet her one day. In the explosion at the airport, the suspect was named Han Bingjiang. However, he took the opportunity to escape during the trial. In the process of Han Bingjiang's escape, he even stabbed a foreign youth. There were many witnesses at the scene that could prove it. As for Han Bingjiang himself, he accidentally fell into an escalator somewhere in the airport in a hurry to escape. As his head was severely injured, there was a lot of bleeding. The rescue was ineffective and he died immediately. The reason why the suspect wanted to make the bomb also became a mystery because of the suspect's death. Song Hauran, Song Ying, and Luocio were on their way back to the hotel in the airport. Song Hauran had his hands behind his neck, walking with a relaxed expression. Suddenly, he said, In the end, we still don't know who the child's parents are? Song Ying said, Didn't the people at the security office say that the child's parents have already taken the child away? Really, it was already over, but you insisted that since we were out, you were hungry and wanted to find something to eat. Now, we've bumped into the scene where Han Bingjiang slipped and almost got the police to question you. What if our identities were exposed? You can't blame me for this. Song Haoran put his hand on Luochio's shoulder. I came out to accompany you to find him. Song Haoran. Oh, I almost forgot. I booked a suite service in my room. I'll go back first. Don't go. Bastard. They chased after each other. Luochio looked at the two people who were playing and walking away. He suddenly stretched and then opened the door of his room in the hotel. When he returned to the room, there was a picture book on the snow-white bedsheet. Luochio poured a glass of water and sat by the window with the picture book. He began to turn the picture book. On the latest page, there was a sun drawn with an orange crayon. Below it was a grassland with flowers almost as tall as the house. The mother and son were holding hands. Luochio picked up the teacup and drank a mouthful of water. Then he turned the picture book to the front. There was a page like this. A woman fell in a pool of blood, and a woman stood beside the body with a knife. What are parents to children? Luochio was silent for a moment and finally closed the picture book. Then he opened the curtain and saw the airport in the early morning. Probably some kind of inheritance. In a distant time and space. A child suddenly appeared in the room. This child was almost the same as the child who was sleeping in the room. This was really a surprising thing. Maybe they were just twins, or so he thought. However, when the sleeping child suddenly woke up, he was very surprised to see a child who looked like him standing by his bed. Who are you? The child who had just woken up asked curiously. Hey, is your mother good to you? The child standing by the window suddenly asked. Although it was very strange, the child who had just woken up was very ignorant. He nodded subconsciously and smiled happily. She is the best to me. Oh, that's good. The child standing by the bed nodded. But all of a sudden, the child by the bed grabbed a pencil from the table by the window and stuck it into the neck of the child by the window without saying a word. That's my mother. Soon, the child on the bed didn't move. He just opened his eyes wide and a pencil was inserted into his neck. Some blood splattered on the body and face of the child by the bed. At this time, a voice suddenly came from downstairs, a very gentle voice. Paul? Paul? Are you awake? If you wake up, quickly come down to brush your teeth and eat breakfast, okay? The school bus is coming. So the child by the bed reached out and wiped the blood on his face, and the blood gradually disappeared from his body. Then he showed a smile as bright as the sun and said happily, I'm awake, Mom. The child changed his clothes and then opened the door of the room. Mom? What's breakfast today? The moment he closed the door made a slight sound of the door axle. Chapter 988. The news that the famous paparazzi Han XX appeared at the airport and caused a terrorist attack of unknown significance was soon spread on the internet. There were different opinions. Some said it was for revenge on society, some said it was because of the support of evil sects, and some said Han XX just wanted to make a big news at first, but unexpectedly got himself into trouble. But these things were not important for the Song family. Because of the tight schedule, the Song family had to take another flight as soon as they woke up in the morning under the arrangement of Mr. Seven. This time, the Song family's destination was the ancestral grave near Mount Tai, so the final destination of this flight was Jinan. Song Ying, who had just woken up, was too sleepy. After boarding the plane, she wanted to put on an eye mask and fall asleep immediately. However, something happened on the plane, which made Song Ying unable to sleep at all. Luochio? Why are you here? Inside the cabin, a young woman had a surprised look on her face. She was so surprised that she covered her mouth with her hand. This was a typical Oriental woman who didn't belong to her in appearance. She was even like a lotus, which made people feel comfortable. Mr. Seven said this was the granddaughter of the old lady, and she would also participate in the following trip. In fact, this plane was not a flight, but a private plane under the name of the Zhang family. What a coincidence! Suddenly, the surroundings seemed to become quiet. After a moment of silence, Luocio squeezed out a sentence that didn't make the situation too quiet. Luocio was indeed surprised. The woman who greeted him was his old acquaintance. When he was in school, she was another student in his class. At first, Luocio just thought that the Zhang family was just a low-key rich family. But later, his opinion gradually changed. Now he knew that the Zhang family, with only 2 women left, was still one of the well-known families in the world. Luocio didn't comment on Zhang Qingrue's ability, but the old lady behind the Zhang family must be a powerful woman. Seeing Luocio on the plane, Zhang Qingrue lost her composure. But Zhang Qingrue was trained by Zhang Lilanfang, so she soon recovered her composure. Suppressing her complicated thoughts, she smiled. Yeah, what a coincidence. We haven't met for a long time, right? The so-called smile of a woman was probably the type of woman like Zhang Qingrue. Song Haoran found it pleasing to the eye, and he couldn't help but compare it to his niece. At this moment, due to her severe insomnia, Song Ying's eye bags were a little obvious, and her face looked rather haggard. Her hair didn't seem to have been combed properly either. She could see some messy strands of hair. It's been a while. Luocio nodded. Let's go in first. There were still people from the Song family waiting behind him, such as the butler, Uncle Wu, and the bodyguards of the Song family. When they sat down in the lounge of the private plane, Song Tianyu chuckled. You must be Qingrue, right? Sister Li mentioned you many times in front of me, saying you're like a lotus flower rising out of the water, with a pure heart. Seeing you today, it's true, it's true. Seeing you reminds me of Sister Li's beautiful appearance in the capital. It's really nostalgic. You flatter me, Mr. Song. Zhang Qingrue was modest and polite in front of Father Song's praise. This won the favor of everyone, especially Zhang Qingrue, who was like an orchid in an empty valley when she was quiet, which was very pleasing to the eye. Hello, I'm Song Ying. Nice to meet you, Miss Zhang. Suddenly, Miss Song Ying greeted her politely. Song Haoran glanced at her, and couldn't help but be surprised. This girl. When did she finish her makeup? Although Song Ying didn't put much effort into her makeup, it was much better than when she had just woken up without makeup. In fact, what made Song Haoran speechless was, her makeup was too good. Maybe it was a woman's talent? Zhang Qingrue. Miss Zhang reached out her hand. The two of them simply bumped their hands and then sat down with a smile. However, the seat was a little narrow, so after they sat down, Song Ying quietly stepped on Song Haoran's foot. Helpless, young Master Song could only touch his nose. Looking at Song Ying's kind smile, he stood up and said, By the way, is there anything to drink here? How about some wine? It's morning, it's not good to drink. Zhang Qingrue smiled. If you don't mind, let me make a pot of tea for you. Miss Zhang, do you know something about tea ceremony? Song Tianyu asked with interest. In fact, this was a good opportunity to test the younger generation of the Zhang family. It was usually like this when aristocratic families interacted with each other. If the younger generation could show their elegance in front of the older generation, it would naturally be more reassuring, because the wealth and power in the mortal world were not fixed, but passed on to the next generation. Whether the younger generation of a world was a dragon or a snake also determined the rise and fall of an aristocratic family in the future. Old Man Song knew that he was about to retire. In the future, he would probably pass away after a period of leisure. After all, this was a necessary stage in life. But he was worried about the foundation of the Song family, so on one hand, he hoped that Song Haoran and Song Ying could really mature, and on the other hand, he hoped to find his elder brother's descendant. At the same time, he didn't want to see the relationship with Zhang Lilanfang cut off when the Song family was passed on to the younger generation, so it was necessary to test Zhang Qingrue. Perhaps Big Sister Li also had such thoughts, so she deliberately sent her granddaughter here. She also wanted to see with her own eyes whether the younger generation of the Song family had any outstanding aspects. Thinking about it, it was just a blink of an eye. At this moment, Zhang Qingrui said with a smile, "Although I have studied, it's not very elegant. At best, I'm just amusing myself. Please don't laugh at me. It doesn't matter. Put effort into making tea." Father Song said indifferently, "A person with a heart can turn dead water into running water. As for a pot of tea, all you need is running water." "Then I'll make a fool of myself." Zhang Qingrui nodded, glancing at Luoqiu intentionally or unintentionally. But at this moment, she found that Luoqiu acted as if he didn't exist here, holding his chin and looking at the blue sky and white clouds outside the window. Zhang Qingrui smiled slightly. In fact, she was very used to Luoqiu's dazed behavior. In the past year of school, Luoqiu was always in this state and never took the initiative to say anything to her. Coming to school and leaving after school, the two of them had maintained a nodding acquaintance for more than a year. Zhang Qingrui thought it was inconceivable, but at the same time, she was inexplicably reassured by this male classmate who was obviously in a favorable position. The sun and the moon in his heart probably couldn't shine on her side, right? She recalled that time when she met Luoqiu by chance on the plain. He was accompanied by a woman who made her pale in comparison. He said that she was someone who had been with him for a long time. Father Song was a very shrewd person. He could see people's little movements very clearly. For example, when Song Ying stepped on Song Haoren just now, or when Zhang Qingrui glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. So he chuckled and suddenly said, "Luoqiu is a lover I found recently. Why, does Miss Zhang know him?" Zhang Qingrui opened her mouth slightly. Although she had some guesses about Luoqiu, she was still a little surprised when she heard about his relationship with the Song family. The most important thing was that although she had forgotten what happened on the Mongolian grassland and had no memory of Kai Wenji and Zhang Jiao in the underground palace, she had recorded everything and sent it to her future self. She knew that Luoqiu wasn't an ordinary person, but it was hard for her to get a clear idea of what kind of person he was. He was a strange person in the city and a member of the aristocratic family system. He really knew how to hide. "Luoqiu and I are old classmates." So this pleasing Miss Zhang started to brew tea while talking about how she and Luoqiu were in a class with only two people. As he listened, Luoqiu realized that time had passed a little too quickly. Although those days were still vivid in his mind, the two of them unconsciously felt a little awkward. "Is that so? That's really fate." Father Song's eyes lit up slightly. He was a person who believed in fate, otherwise he wouldn't be so respectful to Mr. Blind. At the same time, he was also a person who worshipped Buddha, so he valued fate even more. So Father Song looked at Luoqiu and said, "Luoqiu, why don't you introduce this Miss Zhang to us? I want to hear about her. She's a very good person." Luoqiu looked at Zhang Qingrui and suddenly remembered the day when the underground palace collapsed. She stood on a rock at the edge of the huge pit with her arms open to welcome the wind. He smiled and asked, "Are you still in school?" "Yeah." Zhang Qingrui nodded gently. "I told my family that I'll talk about it after I finish school." "Pretty good." Luoqiu nodded. Zhang Qingrui said, "Not bad. I met a few new classmates recently. They don't know me, so I feel good. By the way, is Miss Ren still working as a reporter? If possible, I can ask her for an exclusive interview soon. She'll probably be very happy." Luoqiu smiled without thinking. He knew Rin Xiling's character too well. Although this woman liked to interview strange news, she couldn't report to the chief editor. So if she could interview Gu Yuzhai, a local antique magazine, Ren Xiling would probably accept it. After all, it could offset her daily misdeeds in the magazine. "That's good." Zhang Qingrui took a piece of paper and a pen and wrote a phone number on it. "I changed my phone number recently. You can give this to Miss Ren. You can contact me at any time. I'll arrange the time." "Thank you." Luoqiu took it. Seeing the two talking happily, Song Haoren suddenly whispered in Song Ying's ear, This woman is not simple. She's very skillful. You have a rival. After saying this, Song Howren suddenly opened his eyes wide, because his feet were being rubbed back and forth by Song Ying's heels. Song Ying said kindly, "What did you say?" Zhang Qingrui seemed to feel that it was inappropriate for them to talk like this, so she smiled. "We talked for a long time, but I haven't made tea for you. Please wait a moment, let me get some tea set." "Take your time, Miss Zhang." Father Song nodded. While waiting, Song Ying moved to Luochio's side and asked quietly, "The girlfriend you mentioned is not her, right? Just a classmate." Luochio shook his head and looked out of the window. "Probably a classmate I can get along with in the past." Song Ying looked at him suspiciously. At this time, the plane vibrated slightly. Zhang Qingrui had to put down the tea sets when she came back with them, saying, "Sorry, I forgot the time. The plane is about to take off. Let's check our seats and fasten our seatbelt." She didn't know whether it was intentional or just a coincidence. In the seat arrangement, Luochio and Zhang Qingrui just happened to sit across from each other. The two looked at each other and smiled. They didn't feel uncomfortable. When the Song family arrived in Shanghai, Mr. Blind, who had separated from the Song family in Xiangjiang, had quietly arrived at Wudong Mountain. This time, Mr. Blind asked Song De and Song San to follow him. Song De and Song San were from Shaolin. In the circle of martial artists, Shaolin and Wudong were old rivals and had a lot of history. Hearing that they could go to Wudong, Song De and Song San, who were real martial artists, were naturally interested and agreed without hesitation. However, Wudong Mountain was quite big, and Mr. Blind didn't take them to the Taoist temple on Wudong Mountain. They heard that it was Mr. Blind's former residence. Since Mr. Blind was from Wudong Mountain, did Wudong Mountain have an immortal fate? While Song De and Song San were guessing and exchanging glances from time to time, Mr. Blind had already brought the two of them to a bamboo forest on the mountain. Outside the bamboo forest, there was a white-haired old man with muddy eyes waiting in the cold wind. He seemed to have been waiting for a long time, because it was obvious that this old man was shivering non-stop from the cold. At this moment, seeing Mr. Blind walking in the cold wind, this shivering old man ran up to him. Before he could say anything, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed. "This junior's useless disciple, Huang Qifa, greets ancestor." Song De and Song San looked at each other. They knew that Mr. Blind had a master, and there seemed to be some things that prevented him from returning to his master. However, the two of them didn't know that Mr. Blind had his own inheritance. After all, ancestor and martial granduncle were different. Martial artists could clearly distinguish the difference between the two. "Stand up." Mr. Blind waved his hand and asked Huang Qifa to stand up. Then, he suddenly said, "Have you seen anyone recently?" Huang Qifa was startled and shook his head in confusion. "No. Ancestor, is there something wrong?" Chapter 989. Song De and Song San were flipping through some books on the bookshelves of this house hidden in the bamboo forest out of boredom. These were not martial arts secret books, but some Analects of Confucius, Book of Changes and the like. This was totally different from what they thought at the beginning. "Ada, the blind man asked us to accompany him this time. Is it really just to accompany him?" Song San looked at Song De shook his head blankly. "The blind man said at the beginning, 'Are you too interested in accompanying me to Wudong Mountain?'" Hearing that it was a holy place like Wudong Mountain, the two agreed without hesitation. But in the end, they came here only to see a white-haired grand disciple? "I feel like we were tricked by the blind man." Song De frowned for a while and squeezed out this sentence. "We were tricked. The blind man just wanted to find someone to carry the bags." Song San patted his forehead. The two showed a vexed expression at the same time. "Let's take a walk outside." Song De sighed. "At least we can take it as a sightseeing." Song San had to do the same. Anyway, after getting off the plane in Hong Kong, they had re-registered their mobile phones in China, so the blind man could find them. Grandmaster, Who are the two people you brought? In a quiet room in the house, Master Huang Chifa was standing beside Mr. Blind respectfully. At this moment, Mr. Blind was silently looking at a yellowed ink painting in the room. In the painting, there was an ancient man who looked like an immortal, gazing at the Milky Way. They are just two people to carry the bags, don't mind them, Mr. Blind said slowly and turned around. Then he directly sat down on the futon in the quiet room and waved his hand. Huang Chifa tactfully sat down in front of Mr. Blind. He had only seen this Grandmaster 4 times in his life, including this time, and each time was not long. However, these 4 times almost spanned Huang Chifa's whole life. He had grown from a young boy to an old man, but the Grandmaster's appearance had not changed. Those people in the city who looked for him all called him Master Huang, Great Deity Huang, but in fact, the one in front of him was the real deity. The Grandmaster was the real deity. "Give me your hand," Mr. Blind suddenly said. "I'll feel your bones first." Hearing this, Huang Chifa hurriedly rolled up his sleeves and stretched out his hand. He himself also knew how to feel bones, but it was an unorthodox method that he had figured out by himself. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it didn't work. At this moment, Mr. Blind said again, "Tell me the cause and effect of the incident you mentioned. Also, give me a detailed description of the characteristics of the person you spoke of as all living beings." Huang Chifa's physiognomy, which he had painstakingly practiced for decades, was broken because of that one time. The memory was still fresh in his mind. At this time, he opened his mouth and said, "That day, someone introduced me to a job. Originally, it was just an ordinary job to look at a person's marriage. But I didn't expect that young man's physiognomy to be so strange. It's really unprecedented." Huang Chifa sighed. "At that time, I overestimated myself. Half of it was because I was impatient and broke the rules of the sect. I used the cultivation method passed down by the Grandmaster to open my eyes, to take a closer look. But I didn't expect that I would be backfired. It has been almost half a year since I broke the rules of the sect." "When did you meet this person?" Mr. Blind suddenly asked. Huang Chifa hurriedly told him the specific date and time. He even took out the birth date and horoscope given by the client. Mr. Blind raised his hand and started calculating something with his fingers. But as he calculated, his brows started to furrow. The speed at which his fingers moved became faster and faster. In the end, Huang Chifa could only see the afterimages of his fingers, and he could not help but be shocked. The so-called pinching fingers to calculate was not as simple as it was described by ordinary people. It included a large number of complicated formulas. Without extraordinary memory and mental calculation ability, it was impossible to learn. If one wasn't talented, even if he practiced hard for a lifetime, he would only be able to scratch the surface and not be considered a beginner. Originally, the amount of calculation was not something that the human brain could achieve at the current stage. However, what made Huang Chifa's heart tighten was that Mr. Blind's fingers suddenly stopped. He thought that the immortal Grandmaster had an answer, but unexpectedly, the Grandmaster was still silent. Huang Chifa secretly glanced at the Grandmaster's expression. He didn't open his eyes. Then, he glanced at the Grandmaster's fingers and found that Mr. Blind's fingers were slightly twitching at this moment. Could it be that the ancestral master's hand had gotten cramps from his calculations? "Get me some water." Mr. Blind pinched between his eyebrows and said indifferently, "The rheumatism of these years has come. Let me have a good rest." So it was rheumatism. No wonder. Although it was said that the Grandmaster had a technique to retain his youthful appearance, he was already so old. Huang Chifa thought that he was also an old man. He had to stick the dog-skin plaster on his back for at least 8 to 10 days a month. Although the Grandmaster was an immortal, he was still old after all. "Please wait a moment. Chifa will go and boil a pot of hot water for you right away." He saw Huang Qinfa scramble up and then hurriedly walk out of the quiet room. After that, Mr. Blind slowly used his other hand to hold his trembling wrist. "It's not as simple as all living beings alike," he muttered to himself. Then, he stood up and faced the ink painting hanging on the wall again. "The Grand Master who founded the sect is above," Mr. Blind said in a low voice. "You once left behind a scripture that said, before the world changes, there must be strange phenomena of the mutants. The descendant of the Song family I met in South America was a mutant. Was the person that Huang Qifa met also a mutant? I actually can't calculate it." When Huang Qifa came back with a pot of hot water, Mr. Blind was meditating with his eyes closed. He secretly glanced at Mr. Blind and found that his hand was no longer cramping. However, there was a piece of paper in front of Mr. Blind. Huang Qifa recognized this piece of paper. It was because of this piece of paper that the Grand Master returned from a foreign country. Second of the second month, the dragon raises its head. This was just a very common saying passed down from ancient times. What was the mystery behind it? Although Huang Qifa was puzzled, he did not hesitate and quickly walked up to Mr. Blind. Mr. Blind took out a small porcelain bottle from his clothes and handed it to Huang Qifa. "Pour the powder inside into the hot water and drink it." "Me?" Huang Qifa was stunned. "Of course." Mr. Blind nodded. "Outside the bamboo forest, I saw that your glabella was dark. There was an aura of death rushing out from the canopy. It was already showing signs of death. Is it a disaster of blood?" Huang Qifa was someone who knew how to read faces. When he heard the Grand Master's words, he was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. "No." Mr. Blind shook his head and said, "If it is only a disaster of blood, there is naturally a way to resolve it. Unfortunately, when the signs of death appear, it is a different situation. Grand Master, save me." Huang Qifa's face was pale as he knelt before Mr. Blind in fear. He kowtowed so hard that even his voice was shaking. "We can read faces, predict the heavens, the earth, and people, but we can't do it for ourselves. Do you know why?" Mr. Blind asked calmly. Huang Qifa's voice was bitter as he said, "It is already against the heavens that we seek fortune and avoid calamity. If we seek personal gain for ourselves and reverse yin and yang, then we will offend the heavens and be punished by the heavens. Grand Master, after I called you last time, I have already donated all of my wealth. Grand Master, I know my mistake now. Over the years, you have revealed too many secrets, even though it is nothing serious." Mr. Blind sighed. "But you have changed the fate of so many people by reading their faces. Over time, you have committed many sins. It is too late to mend the pen after the sheep is lost. Now, not only have you lost your power, your body is slowly withering. Even the gods will not be able to save you. I am afraid you will not live to see the Mid-Autumn Festival this year." "Grand Master, save me, save me!" Huang Qifa cried. "Take this medicine every month. It should be enough for you to live through this year." Mr. Blind stood up and said calmly, "Take care of yourself. However, you will face a tribulation in the coming days. It is best not to go out. Stay here and recuperate. Cultivate your heart and mind well. Perhaps you will be able to survive." Mr. Blind's voice had gone far away, leaving Huang Qifa sitting on the ground in a daze. The older a person was, the more afraid they were of death. Outside the bamboo forest was a large forest. Outside the forest was a famous scenic spot of the Wudong Mountain. In fact, the bamboo forest was actually within the scenic spot of the Wudong Mountain. However, there was a special formation set up in the bamboo forest. It was very easy for ordinary people to get lost in the bamboo forest. As they walked, they would walk out of the bamboo forest. Of course, if it was aerial photography, then it would be fine. However, who would take aerial photography of such a small bamboo forest for no reason? At this time, Songda and Song San found an electric pole. Then, the two of them squatted under this electric pole. Not because of anything else, but simply because the signal in this place was better. The matter was like this. Song San was bored and opened a domestic mobile video website. He just happened to see a video about wudong. He couldn't help but click on it. Today's #1 Qigong, the name of the video naturally made Song San very curious. After all, as a martial artist, he knew very well what Qigong was all about. Of course, like in TV dramas where one could step on the soles of one's feet and soar into the sky, there were special effects added to deceive children. However, real Qigong could still be done. F***ck, we were fooled. Song San scolded loudly. What #1 Qigong? Isn't this just ordinary parkour? Songda, who was sending an SMS to a certain woman on the other side of the ocean, rolled his eyes and said, "Do you think that martial arts experts are cabbages that you can meet casually? Besides, the country's machinery forbids martial arts. If it's real Qigong, how can it be released and spread on the internet?" Songda was saying this, but he saw Song San's expression at this time as if he had seen a ghost. He looked at the sky dumbly and said with his mouth wide open, "Ada, the cabbages expert you said has appeared." Songda raised his head in astonishment and saw a figure in the sky. At this time, the figure was descending towards a small forest not far away. They didn't see wrongly. It was indeed descending and not falling, because both Songda and Song San saw that this floating figure was carrying another figure on his back. Is this the legendary Qi controlling technique? My God, wudong is indeed one of the holy lands. Song San's eyes suddenly lit up. Songda didn't have time to continue sending SMS. He hurriedly stuffed his phone into his pocket and glanced at Song San. Then, he hurriedly walked towards the small forest where the figure had landed. When experts meet experts, of course they would fight. At this time, a scream suddenly came from the sky above the small forest. "Ah! Be careful, brother!" "Wah!" Obviously, there were two different voices. The figure fell on the canopy and broke the branches along the way. Finally, it was hooked and stopped. However, the branches couldn't bear the weight and finally broke. Bang! The two figures separated at the moment of falling. One quickly bounced and landed on the ground while the other hit the ground solidly. "Zhuifeng, you bastard, you didn't save me!" The figure hit the ground and swore at this time. "It's not my fault. Instinctive reaction, hee." A young man walked over with a mischievous smile on his face. He pulled the figure up from the ground and patted the dirt off his body. They were Mo Xiaofei and Zhuifeng. As for why a human and a demon would appear here, it would have to start from before the start of the winter break. That day, after the Shinryu of Kelowna threw his first disciple, Mo Xiaofei, to Sun Shaoxing, he left with the little butterfly monster, Luo Dance. Before leaving, the Shinryu of Kelowna once mentioned the matter of the cloth path, saying that it might let Mo Xiaofei know about his previous life. Therefore, Mo Xiaofei had an idea. He wanted to secretly go to Mount Tai during the winter vacation. Zhuifeng was another reason. However, as a student, it was too difficult to pay for the travel expenses along the way. Mo Xiaofei, who was determined to be a hero, was very determined not to use his superpower to make money, so he made a decision to travel on a budget. Plane? I can fly. Train? I can fly. Bus? I can still fly. Mo Xiaofei, who planned to fly all the way to Mount Tai, became Zhuifeng's exclusive mount. It had been a week since they set off, and they had successfully left the province where they lived and came here. "Water, give me some water." Mo Xiaofei sat down at this time and glanced at Zhuifeng weakly. It was fine for him to fly alone. However, with Zhuifeng on his back, it was hard for him. Not to mention, it took almost a day to travel. Even so, Mo Xiaofei felt that his flying time was increasing every day. Perhaps it was the so-called good training. "Where are we?" Mo Xiaofei glanced at Zhuifeng at this time. Zhuifeng quickly took out the map. He was responsible for looking at the terrain and route on this road. But at this moment there was a soft sound suddenly. Two figures shot out from the woods. One was tall and majestic, and the other was thin. The tall and majestic man said loudly, "Song Qinshu, the abandoned disciple of Shaolin. Please enlighten me, young masters." The thin man also said in a deep voice, "Song Qinshu, the abandoned disciple of Shaolin. Please enlighten me, young masters." What the hell? Chapter 990. Mo Xiaofei and Zhuifeng looked at each other, not knowing the origin of these two uncles. "Well, uncles, did you make a mistake?" Mo Xiaofei stood up. "We're just passing by, not some young master." Songda, who called himself Song Qinshu, said seriously, "Young masters, you don't have to hide. Just now, we've seen young master's magical lightness skill. It's really amazing." Mo Xiaofei gave a start. He had tried his best to fly in a deserted place, and basically chose to fly at night. Today, because the road was mountainous, he planned to fly for a while during the day. Sure enough, he was seen. "To tell you the truth, we're also martial artists." Songda, who called himself Song Qinshu too, slowly exhaled at this time, pressing his palm on the trunk of an uncle beside him. When Song San's palm left, a clear palm print was left on the trunk, about 1 or 2 inches deep. "Wow, how did he do it?" Zhuifeng walked to the trunk curiously, carefully looking at the palm print. With the power of his monster race, it was not difficult to blow up this tree. The difficulty was that he couldn't leave a palm print by pressing lightly. Song San's face was complacent at this time, chuckling, "It's just some soft palm skills. Compared with this young master's lightness skill, it's really far behind." "A martial arts master?" Mo Xiaofei blinked. Since there were monsters like Zhuifeng and Shinryu in this world, and even he was a superpower user, and that boss, then it was not strange that there were martial arts masters. Mo Xiaofei always felt that it was better not to expose his superpower. Since these two uncles thought it was the so-called lightness skill, it was not a big deal. "Young masters, where did you learn from?" Songda cupped his fist and asked. Mo Xiaofei coughed slightly. "I'm sorry, I promised my teacher not to reveal it casually." "Understood." Songda nodded, as if he was used to this. He immediately said, "I'm really sorry to disturb the two of you. It's just that the two of us have been training hard since we were young and have learned a lot of martial art. Although the land of China was vast, it was difficult to find traces of people who truly practiced martial art. Us two brothers have not made any progress for a long time. I wonder if the two young masters can give us some guidance." In fact, Songda's words were already very polite. It was precisely because he had seen the two of them fly for such a long time that Songda had the patience to call them little master. Otherwise, in reality, the two of them were just children. On the other side, Mo Xiaofei even felt apologetic if he delayed. After all, the big man's eyes were shining. "But I don't know any martial arts. Let me try." Unexpectedly, Zhuifeng said excitedly. Then, he closed his eyes and stood in front of the tree trunk. He imitated Song San and pressed his palm on the tree trunk. However, nothing happened after Zhuifeng pressed it for a while. Songda and Song San looked at each other. Song San shook his head and smiled. "Little master, although this soft palm is not a top-notch martial art, it's the result of years of hard work." Suddenly, a surge of wild aura erupted from Zhuifeng's body. In an instant, it was as if there were countless murderous auras soaring into the sky, covering the sky like dark clouds. Under the impact of this terrifying murderous aura, Songda and Song San's mouths were dry and their brains were buzzing. With a loud bang, Songda and Song San widened their eyes at the same time. Their eyeballs almost fell out. This was because the entire tree directly exploded under wind-chasing Wolf's palm. The tree trunk that was hard for a person to wrap their arms around directly turned into sawdust. Rumble, it's really difficult. Zhuifeng shook his head and looked at his palm. Then, he pressed on another tree, seemingly intending to try again. Emo Xiaofei walked to Xuefeng in shock and knocked on his head. Are you stupid? This is a scenic spot. What if you have to pay for the damages? Big brother, I've already restrained my strength. Xuefeng shrugged his shoulders. He was a fearless person. However, he was afraid of Emo Xiaofei's punishment for some reason. Thus he had to lower his head honestly. Emo Xiaofei sighed. I still have some pocket money left. I'll go find the person in charge here and see if it's enough for compensation. Also, you released too much demonic aura. What if it's discovered? Sorry, I've tried my best to restrain it. In fact, I didn't release much. Xuefeng lowered his head. Emo Xiaofei sighed again. After rubbing Xuefeng's head, he turned around. By the way, the two uncles. Hey, where are they? Emo Xiaofei blinked his eyes. The two strange uncles who suddenly appeared disappeared without him noticing. Xuefeng sniffed and then pointed in a direction. They seemed to have gone there. Should we go after them? Forget it. Let's see how to deal with this tree first. Emo Xiaofei shook his head. They were probably scared away by the demonic aura released by Xuefeng. For Emo Xiaofei, this was just a small episode. Under the telephone pole outside the woods, Song De and Song San were leaning against each other. The two brothers were drenched and gasping for breath. This murderous aura, is it really released by a human? Song San took a few deep breaths. For a moment, I thought I was going to be killed. He intended to smoke a cigarette, but the hand holding the cigarette box kept trembling. The cigarette fell from the box and he couldn't catch it. At this moment, Songda was also silently reciting the incantation Blind had written for him earlier. He gradually calmed down and couldn't help but let out a long sigh. When I was still in Shaolin Temple, Master said that there were many capable people in the Divine Continent, and that there was always someone better than you. The blind man also said that at his level, there were still many people who were more powerful than him. Songda bitterly laughed again. All these years, us three brothers have been living in a foreign country. Not only have our martial arts stagnated, I'm afraid that even our eyesight has also stagnated. Just now, if that young master's palm had landed on my body, I'm afraid that even with my martial arts, I wouldn't have been able to withstand it. Yeah, who would have thought that the true power of these two young warriors could be so profound? Song San also sighed and then said, Maybe this is not as simple as a martial artist's true power. You're saying these two young masters are the same as the blind man? Songda was startled. Song San said, Ada, to be honest, you and I are both warriors. We've been training hard for decades. Do you think that with the true power of a warrior they can really fly? That's just a fantasy we've always had. Songda was silent, but he more or less agreed with Song San's words. After all, this was Wudong. Maybe to ordinary people it was just a famous scenic spot, but Wudong Mountain was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. This was something he had heard from his master when he was still in Shaolin Temple. Even though they said so, the two brothers Song De and Song San couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed when they met two young people who had great skills that far surpassed them. They naturally didn't have the mood to continue sightseeing and directly rushed towards the house in the bamboo forest. Unexpectedly, they met the blind man on the way. When the blind man saw the two of them, he didn't say much and directly said, I've finished dealing with the matters in Wudong. Next, we'll leave this place. So fast? Songda was startled. The blind man said, I've already seen the message my senior brother left for me. There's a special way to interpret it. He also told me the destination of this trip. There's no time to lose, let's leave now. All right. Songda nodded, but he suddenly remembered the two young experts he met in the forest. He pondered for a moment and said, That's right, blind man, I have something to ask you. Is there anyone like you on Wudong Mountain? Songda stared at the blind man and asked. The blind man was silent for a moment, then slowly said, There used to be. Then now, the blind man didn't say anything. He only said indifferently, "It's getting late. Do you want to leave?" "If you don't want to leave, I can do it myself." Songda and Song San looked at each other and nodded. They didn't mention that they met the young experts in the forest, because that would be too embarrassing. Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng walked around nearby, but didn't find any place like the management office. Mo Xiaofei had no choice but to return to the original place and deal with the corpse of the fallen ancient tree. After that, he and Juefeng continued their journey. It seemed that it was indeed dangerous to travel during the day to meet living people in the deep forest. Mo Xiaofei had no choice but to continue his plan of traveling at night. "And Juefeng, we're obviously going to Mount Tai. Why did we fly to Wudong Mountain? There's something wrong with your navigation." From the place where they lived, Wudong Mountain wasn't in a straight line with Mount Tai. It's all mountain roads. They look similar. There's no road sign. It's good enough that we didn't go to the sea, right? Juefeng stuck out his tongue, then suddenly said, "Brother, there's a light in front. It seems that someone lives there." It was the light from the depths of the bamboo forest. It seemed to be a wooden house. "Why don't we stay here tonight?" Juefeng suggested. Mo Xiaofei thought for a while. Including last night, they had been on the road for 1 night and 1 day. The flight time was about 15 hours, which was indeed his limit. At this moment, he felt a headache and knew that he couldn't force himself to continue, so he nodded. They then quietly landed in front of the wooden house. It was a very exquisite house, not like it was built casually. "Is there anyone here?" Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng waited outside the door for a while before footsteps were heard. Then, a white-haired, haggard old man opened the door. "Hello, old man," Mo Xiaofei said very politely. "My brother and I got lost nearby. We don't know if we found this place. My phone just ran out of battery. Can you let us stay here for 1 night?" The old man looked at Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng for a while. No one knew what he was thinking, but his eyes were gloomy and scary, which made Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng feel a little uncomfortable. Unexpectedly, the old man suddenly showed a smile and said kindly, "Come in. It's cold outside. Come in and have a rest. I'm cooking. If you don't mind, have some." "Thank you, old man." Mo Xiaofei quickly thanked him politely. After the old man led the two of them into the wooden house, he walked towards the kitchen and left the two of them in a small hall inside the house. The structure of this wooden house was older than any old house Mo Xiaofei had ever seen, but it was very clean. It seemed that someone had been living here for a long time. Wind-chasing Wolf rested his head on his hands and said, "Big brother, this old man looks weird. Be careful later. I don't know why this old man lives here alone in this deep forest." Mo Xiaofei nodded. The old man's eyes were really weird at first. It seemed that he had no interest in life, but he suddenly brightened up. Juefeng yawned, lying on the table, and said, "Brother, I'm a little sleepy. Wake me up when we eat." Mo Xiaofei shook his head. Looking at Juefeng's sleeping appearance, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was just that the depths of the bamboo forest were unusually quiet. It was even quieter when the sun went down. There was only the flickering candlelight in front of him. Mo Xiaofei also felt a little tired as he unknowingly closed his eyes. For a superpower user like him, the best way to replenish his spirit was to rest and sleep. At this moment, a night breeze blew in from the window and extinguished the candlelight in the small hall. Soon after, the wooden door outside the hall slowly opened. The old man who went to the kitchen came in with some food. He didn't intend to light the candles. He just moved around with the help of some light outside the hall. After that, the old man slowly looked at Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng, who had fallen asleep. He picked up the bowl and slowly ate. As he ate, he said, "I used to eat all kinds of delicacies every day. I lived a life of luxury. I don't think it's bad and I'm not tired of it. So I occasionally eat a simple meal. The doctor said I should eat something bland. But I think one's life is short, why should I limit myself?" Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng still hadn't woken up. The old man continued to talk to himself. Haha, now I think it's a blessing to be able to eat this simple meal. But it's a pity that I don't have long to live. Tell me, what should I do if I don't have long to live? The old man stared at Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng. His face suddenly turned gloomy. You're still so young. You have a lot of days ahead. Why don't you lend me some time? Feng Shui metaphysics reversed yin and yang and changed one's fate. Naturally, there were ways to extend one's life. Chapter 991. The method of changing one's name to extend one's life was not passed down by Huang Qifa from Mr. Blind. Linen Taoism was an orthodox Feng Shui sect of physiognomy. Naturally, there were rules that forbade people from using such sinister method. However, Huang Qifa could not be said to be an orthodox disciple of Linen Taoism, because his grandfather was only a close servant of Mr. Blind Man and had not formally become his disciple. Therefore, Huang Qifa felt that he should not be restricted by the rules of cloth sect. As for this evil method of extending one's life, he had learned it from somewhere else over the years. It happened in the morning. Once, he was invited to Thailand. When he was giving guidance to a local general, he met a Nanyang tame headmaster and learned this method from him. However, this method was indeed quite sinister. Even though Huang Qifa had learned it, he had only used it twice over the years. The first time was to extend the life of a tall and powerful person. The second time was because he had no choice but to be threatened. The other party had put a knife to his neck. He had no choice but to obey. This was the third time. Huang Qifa took a deep breath and carefully took out a short bamboo tube. He had paid a great price to get this thing from the Nanyang tame headmaster. It could only be used 3 times. For so many years, Huang Qifa had been saving it for the last time. It could be considered as a backup plan for himself. Now, it was time for him to use this backup plan. Inside the bamboo tube was a strange goo called life-linking goo. It could take the life of the first person it bit. When it bit the second time, it would spit out this life and transfer it to another person. However, after this life-linking goo was used once, the person would die directly. Huang Qifa had to wait for the right opportunity, because in his view, the 2 young people in front of him had restrained their brilliance and were emitting spiritual light. They were the kind of people who would have a meteoric rise in the future. However, he could not tell which one of them would have a better life. Huang Qifa did not care about being immortal. He knew that he did not have the qualifications. Otherwise, the ancestor, Mr. Blind, would not have never asked him to follow him when he met him several times. Huang Qifa just wanted to live a few more years and continue to enjoy the things that he had not enjoyed enough in this life. 20 years. No, just 15 years. Huang Qifa gritted his teeth and pulled out the stopper of the bamboo tube with a gloomy face. I want 15 years, and you guys are still so young. Finally, Huang Qifa pointed the bamboo tube at the younger Juefeng and spat out a strange syllable from his mouth. This was a special method of activating the goo worm in the bamboo tube, which was also Huang Qifa's tame headmaster from Nanyang. However, no matter how Huang Qifa activated it, the goo worm in the bamboo tube did not come out. This scared Huang Qifa so much that he hurriedly checked. The goo worm in the bamboo tube was not dead. Only then did he feel slightly relieved. Huang Qifa couldn't help but frown. The tame headmaster didn't mention to him that the life-linking voodoo didn't bite people. But now was not the time to ask the tame headmaster, so Huang Qifa had to turn his target to Mo Xiaofei on the other side. It moved. This time, under the activation of the special syllable, a colorful centipede slowly crawled out of the bamboo tube. Huang Qifa's breathing couldn't help but speed up a little, but he believed that these 2 young men wouldn't wake up so easily. After all, before he came in, he released a large dose of smoke in the air. But something happened that made Huang Qifa stunned again. Although the goo worm was activated this time, it still didn't climb onto Mo Xiaofei's body. It seemed to be afraid of something, and it automatically curled up on the table. Damn it! What the hell is going on? This life-linking voodoo is so scared. This shouldn't be. Could it be that these two young men who haven't reached adulthood are so tough that even the life-linking voodoo doesn't dare to bite them? The more they don't dare to, the tougher their life is. Huang Qifa was not angry at this time, but he had an unprecedented excitement. If the life-linking voodoo bit back a tough life, then he would benefit more. So Huang Qifa gritted his teeth at this time, biting his finger fiercely. He used his blood on this colorful centipede's? Then, he gently drew out a line of blood. The blood on the colorful centipede's back quickly merged into its body at this moment, and its body slowly opened at this time. Huang Qifa quickly uttered a special syllable from his mouth, and this colorful centipede also crawled toward Emo Xiaofei's arm little by little. First it climbed onto Emo Xiaofei's arm, then it climbed onto Emo Xiaofei's shoulder. Finally, this colorful centipede crawled to Emo Xiaofei's left ear, and then it probed into his ear little by little. Seeing this life-linking voodoo had completely crawled into Emo Xiaofei's ear, Huang Qifa suddenly sighed and sat down. Next, he just needed to wait for this life-linking voodoo to bite back his life. But at this moment, Xuefeng suddenly opened his eyes. Xuefeng suddenly opened his eyes, and a red light flashed in his eyes. Xuefeng directly raised his head at this time, just in time to see Huang Qifa holding a bamboo tube in his hand, with blood on his fingers. This bamboo tube was even aimed at Emo Xiaofei. Big brother? Big brother? Xuefeng subconsciously pushed Emo Xiaofei, but found that Emo Xiaofei didn't seem to wake up at all. He couldn't help but look at Huang Qifa angrily, revealing a pair of sharp canine teeth. "Old man, what did you do to my big brother?" Huang Qifa was frightened by Xuefeng's ferocious look. He was doing something wrong, so now his face turned pale and cold sweat poured out. How did you wake up? I clearly used a lot of smoke to knock you out." Xuefeng ignored him, directly reaching out and grabbing Huang Qifa's arm. His grip was very strong. Under this grab, Huang Qifa even felt that his bones were directly crushed. He suddenly screamed, Let me go! I'll ask you one more time, what did you do to my big brother?" Wind-chasing wolf leaned over and stared at Huang Qifa. "If you don't tell me, I'll kill you. I don't have a good impression of humans. You're not human." In horror, Huang Qifa saw that Xuefeng's pupils had a slit in the middle, becoming long and narrow, and glowing with purple light. This was not a pair of eyes that a human could have. "What did you do to my big brother?" Xuefeng saw that Emo Xiaofei didn't wake up no matter how hard he shook him, so he didn't intend to say anything more to this old man. He directly reached out and grabbed Huang Qifa's neck. He only exerted a little force, but Huang Qifa had difficulty breathing and painfully slapped him. But at this time, the unconscious Emo Xiaofei suddenly fell to the ground and began to roll in pain. Emo Xiaofei held his head tightly, as if he was experiencing some extreme pain. At this moment, Emo Xiaofei's body floated up, and a violent pushing force spread out from his body. Xuefeng couldn't react for a moment, and his body was directly thrown out, hitting a wooden beam in the house. Huang Qifa was the only one who was even more dismal. This huge force directly pushed his body towards the wall. His old bones were almost directly shattered from the impact. Huang Qifa spat out a mouthful of old blood. He was like a candle in the wind, exhaling more than inhaling. "Big brother!" Xuefeng gritted his teeth, got up, and wanted to approach Emo Xiaofei. However, for the current Xuefeng, he was like an ordinary person walking in front of a hurricane. Even with the magical power of Greedy Wolf Star, he couldn't move an inch. "Big brother!" Emo Xiaofei's body floated in the air at this time. He suddenly opened his mouth and let out a shrill scream. In an instant, Emo Xiaofei's body fell directly to the ground, and the terrifying pushing force disappeared in an instant. "Big brother!" Emo Xiaofei suddenly felt that his body didn't belong to him. He even felt a little uncomfortable and had a splitting headache. Countless chaotic voices began to reverberate in his mind. Some of those voices were like large bells, some were like the roars of thousands of soldiers and horses, and some were like the cries of women, making it difficult for him to distinguish between what was being said and what was not. Your Majesty, now the 6 countries are unified. All the land under the sky belongs to the Emperor, and all the people on the shores of the land are the Emperor's subjects. Su Fu, I ordered you to find the elixir of immortality. Did you do it? You will die a horrible death. Burn books and bury children. You will be punished by heaven. Princess Yushu, do you know my intention? Suddenly, Emo Xiaofei found himself in a huge palace. Candles were lit around the palace, making it as bright as day, but it was so cold that it made people feel cold. The throne in front of the palace was covered by a green gauze curtain. At this time, the chilly wind in the palace was blowing the green gauze curtain constantly. Vaguely, Emo Xiaofei seemed to see a figure sitting on the throne in the palace. Who are you? Emo Xiaofei covered his forehead and staggered forward. However, the path to the throne seemed to be endless. Emo Xiaofei only felt that the distance between him and the figure on the throne was increasing instead of decreasing. Who are you? Are you my previous incarnation? Emo Xiaofei pressed his head painfully. Who the hell are you? The figure on the throne behind the green gauze curtain suddenly stood up slowly. The figure behind the gauze curtain suddenly waved his hand, and the candlelight in the hall went out instantly. From now on, you will stay in this cage in my place. Elder brother! Elder brother! Zhuefeng walked to Emo Xiaofei, shook Missouri Xiaofei's shoulders hard, and put his ears on Emo Xiaofei's chest. Fortunately, Zhuefeng raised his head. Emo Xiaofei's heartbeat was strong and powerful, which made Zhuefeng relaxed a lot. At this moment, Emo Xiaofei finally opened his eyes slowly. When he opened his eyes and saw Zhuefeng, he frowned slightly, and then began to look around. After that, Emo Xiaofei became silent again. His eyes were gloomy and uncertain, and no one knew what he was thinking. Elder brother, how are you? Zhuefeng asked anxiously. Elder brother Emo Xiaofei seemed to be different after waking up, especially his eyes, which made Zhuefeng a little nervous, thinking that it was a very sharp gaze. Where is this place? Finally, Emo Xiaofei slowly opened his mouth and spoke his first words after waking up. Zhuefeng gave a start and said subconsciously, Wudong Mountain. Elder brother, have you forgotten? Emo Xiaofei frowned again, looking at Zhuefeng up and down, and suddenly asked, Why are you calling me? What me? Elder brother, what's wrong with you? Why are you talking so strangely? Zhuefeng scratched his head, looking puzzled, and then said, It must be this damn old man. Oh no. Elder brother, you must have been tricked by this damn old man, and now you're acting silly. How dare you? Emo Xiaofei snorted, flinging his sleeves. At this moment, Zhuefeng's heart suddenly beat. He only felt a huge pressure appeared out of nowhere, and instantly pressed him to kneel on the ground. Elder brother's superpower of gravity was getting more and more terrifying. However, before Zhuefeng had time to think about it, Emo Xiaofei in front of him suddenly looked at his palm in a daze. When did I, while thinking, Zhuefeng, who couldn't stand under the pressure, had to summon his demon power, and stood up under the heavy gravity with difficulty. Zhuefeng, who already showed signs of demonization, panted, Elder brother, wake up! I'm Zhuefeng. Have you forgotten? Elder brother Emo Xiaofei. Emo Xiaofei? Emo Xiaofei frowned again and said to himself, This is my name in this life? Stupid. And you? Emo Xiaofei looked at Zhuefeng at this time with a gloomy face. You're actually a demon? A demon from a foreign tribe? How dare you call me brother? When Zhuefeng heard this, he was not angry. Instead, he was surprised, as if he was scared silly. He muttered to himself, Oh no, elder brother is really fooled by this damn old man. He even forgot about me. But at this moment, Mo Xiaofei suddenly showed a trace of pain. He suddenly raised his hand and aimed it at his ear. Then, he made a grabbing motion and pulled out a small colorful centipede from his left ear. Evil creature, die. Mo Xiaofei pinched his palm at this time, and the colorful centipede was strangled in his hand. At this time, Huang Qifa, who was half dead, saw that his life-saving life-linking goo was gone, and immediately screamed, "My life-linking goo! Demon, how dare you harm me? You deserve to die." Hearing this, Mo Xiaofei immediately pointed at Huang Qifa. At this moment, Huang Qifa's soul seemed to have been drawn out, leaving only an empty shell. He opened his mouth, and then there was no breath left. He died just like that. Chapter 992. This wasn't the product of the familiar era. Mo Xiaofei held the modern tool called mobile phone and looked at it from top to bottom. When his finger accidentally touched the screen of the mobile phone, the interface that suddenly opened and the sound that came from the mobile phone made him throw the mobile phone on the table. Xuefeng was in a daze during the whole process, watching his elder brother's strange behavior. That damned old man must have done something to his elder brother. Such a huge, strange centipede had crawled into his elder brother's ear. Although it had been dragged out in the end, who knew if that centipede had not bitten off his elder brother's brain? Xuefeng had thought of the possibility that Mo Xiaofei might be possessed by an evil spirit, but he quickly denied this idea. Xuefeng, who had inherited part of the greed inheritance, actually had a lot of knowledge in his mind, including the condition of being possessed by an evil spirit. However, his elder brother Mo Xiaofei was very special. Even those powerful evil spirits might not be able to get close to him. Ordinary evil spirits might not even be able to get close to him. This was not because of Big Brother Mo Xiaofei's powerful superpower, but because Big Brother Mo Xiaofei's body contained true dragon's blood. Because of the true dragon's blood's strengthening and transformation of his body, Brother Mo Xiaofei was able to bear this powerful and constantly improving superpower. For the time being, he didn't have to worry that the evolution of his brain would exceed the burden of his body. I'm afraid his brain was really bitten by the centipede. Isn't that what people in modern society call it? Thinking disorder. Can this thing really transmit sound from 1,000 miles away, and even communicate face-to-face with people thousands of miles away? Mo Xiaofei suddenly looked at Xuefeng. "Elder brother, why don't you give a call home and try it with your parents?" Xuefeng said tentatively. He dropped out of junior high school, so he didn't have a high level of education. Most of his knowledge came from hearsay. He heard that if someone was crazy, it was better to communicate with their relative. Anyway, this was just a flash of inspiration for wind-chasing wolf. No need. Mo Xiaofei shook his head and stared at Xuefeng, saying indifferently, "I've just woken up, so there are many things I don't know about the modern society. Although you're a demon, you're still able to protect me when I'm in danger. That's enough to show your loyalty." Hee. Xuefeng scratched his head embarrassedly. "Big brother, what are you saying? We are brothers. Isn't that what you said? Besides, you and I didn't even know each other back then. You also had a reason to sacrifice your life for me. This is nothing." That was an unforgettable scene for Xuefeng. In the grand concert in the gymnasium, that young man in a loose firefighter's uniform risked his life to save her. That determined gaze. Mo Xiaofei stood up and paced back and forth with his hands behind his back. He muttered to himself, "Although I rule the 6 directions, I don't have anyone I can trust. It's rare for me to see such sincerity in your eyes. You said you're Xuefeng, right?" Xuefeng nodded. Facing a psychopath, I'd better go along with him first. In fact, Xuefeng didn't have a better way now. He naturally knew that Mo Xiaofei's current situation wasn't good. However, this was something that he couldn't solve with his ability. In this case, it was better to keep a close watch on him. At least, he wouldn't let brother Mo Xiaofei run around. Otherwise, if he caused trouble with his ability, he would be more terrifying than himself. If he could find Master Long or Master Turtle, they should be able to find a solution. As for the other option, it was to go back to the pet hospital. But Xuefeng had a headache when he thought about it, because he and Mo Xiaofei sneaked out when Sun Shaoxing, the temporary coach, was having a good time in the Elysium world. Besides, if his brother became like this, it would only make his uncle and aunt worried if he was sent back home. It wasn't good. Mo Xiaofei walked to the front of Xuefeng at this time, stretched out his hand and put it on his shoulder. He said indifferently, "Magnanimity is magnanimous. If I don't have such magnanimity, how can I be a king? Although you are a demon, you are loyal. I can still put you in an important position. Today, I just woke up, and you are the only one I can trust. Well, I will confer you the title of Grand Commandant with a golden seal and a purple ribbon. You will be in charge of military affairs. But now it's simple. Let's leave the matter of the golden seal for another time." Okay. Although I don't know what it is, I'll just agree. There should be no problem, right? Brother, when will you come back? Mo Xiaofei pondered for a moment at this time, then sat down, closed his eyes and meditated. Despite this, Xuefeng still didn't dare to speak loudly. He even shut up directly because he only felt that his brother had become aggressive at this time, which made him unconsciously have a kind of awe. Suddenly, Mo Xiaofei opened his eyes and asked slowly, "Grand Commandant Xuefeng, I want to ask you, who do you think you are? Who was the emperor back then?" "Ah." Xuefeng scratched his head. He didn't care about human society at all. If he was asked when Iron Armor Omnipotent Man would be broadcasted, he could answer. "What? Grand Commandant Xuefeng, you don't know?" Mo Xiaofei frowned at this time. "Well," Xuefeng had to say helplessly, "Brother, why don't you ask Baidu?" "Baidu?" Mo Xiaofei gave a start. Xuefeng nodded, saying with half understanding, "Isn't that what people say? Ask Baidu. You can find the answer to anything. Baidu knows everything." Mo Xiaofei suddenly asked curiously, "Is this true? I didn't expect that there's such a knowledgeable person in this world. What's more, this person is a woman. Well, where is she? How can I meet her?" "Well, Baidu seems to be in your mobile phone." Mo Xiaofei gave a start again, then looked at the smartphone on the table, gazing at it deeply. "Now, there's such a strange magic that can trap people in this small box. Brother, wake up!" The old house of the Song family was not far from Mount Tai. From here, one could overlook the peak of Mount Tai. That being said, there was still a long distance to Mount Tai. The Song family and Luochio's group took the private plane of the Zhang family. After getting off the plane, the special car arranged by Mr. Seven was already waiting outside the airport. This time, nothing strange happened in the airport. After getting on the special car, Song Tianyu was silent all the way. After about half a day's drive, Song Tianyu finally returned to the hometown he had left for many years. This time, he had brought back the Song family's bloodline that had been wandering outside. Even Song Tianyu, who had lived half of his life as an iron-blooded person, couldn't help but shed tears. It was probably a kind of feeling called homesickness. As soon as he got off the car, Song Tianyu let go of Song Haoran and Song Ying's hands. Holding his crutch, he staggered to a small slope overlooking the village ahead. The old man's figure began to elongate under the orange-red sky. At this time, Song Tianyu waved his crutch, pointing to a place with people in front, and began to talk about the past many years. "Actually, I didn't grow up here," Song Tianyu slowly said, "but when I was a child, my family would bring me back here once a year. My Abba, grandpa, and big brother, who is also your grandfather." He looked at Luochio and smiled in relief. Moving his crutch, he pointed to a mountain forest not far away. "The ancestral grave of the Song family is there. Rest well tonight, I'll take you there tomorrow." Luochio felt the wind was strong, so he helped Father Song down. From here on, Song Tianyu chose to walk. At that time, this place was called Song Family Village. Now it's called Song Village. I heard from my grandfather that Song Family Village was protected by an immortal. It was the child of the dragon god, called Wang. It lived in the pool in the forest behind the mountain. The child of the dragon god. Luochio was startled and curiously asked, Wang? Wang as in forget or see? Wang as in see. Song Tianyu was lost in his memories. When I was a child, I asked my grandfather to take me to see the child of the dragon god. He did. At that time, I went to the pool. It was connected to a medium-sized waterfall. At that time, I was young and had never seen a waterfall. I felt that the place had an extraordinary aura, and I was quite frightened. My grandfather and I stood there for a long time, and I could still hear thunderous sounds coming from the depths of the waterfall. My grandfather told me that it was the child of the dragon god, Wang, shouting. It was the roar of a dragon. Hearing this, Song Ying came forward and casually said, There should be a cave or something behind the waterfall. The wind passed through, forming a wind hole, and that's why there was the sound. Song Tianyu just chuckled and lightly tapped Song Ying's head with his crutch. If you had said this to my grandfather back then, he would have tapped you like this and said you were disrespectful. Song Ying could only stick out her tongue. Zhang Qingrui, who was following beside them, smiled faintly. As the saying goes, it's not the height of a mountain, it's the presence of a dragon that makes it spiritual. This place is surrounded by green hills and clear waters. It's indeed a place with good feng shui. Miss Zhang also knows about feng shui metaphysics? Father Song looked at her with a smile. Zhang Qingrui stroked her hair and said softly, I can't say that I understand it. It's just that I have some old books on feng shui metaphysics at home. When I was free, I flipped through some of them. That's why I only know a little, but it's all superficial knowledge. Miss Zhang is too modest. Song Tianyu chuckled. Feng shui geomancy, speaking of which, it's the old profession of your grandmother's family. Zhang Qingrui just smiled and didn't intend to continue on this topic. Is the house in front the ancestral home? Luochio suddenly asked as he looked at the big old courtyard in front of them. Song Tianyu said, That's right. That's the ancestral home of our Song family. 20 years ago, when I first came back from abroad, more than half of the house was already there. The things in the house had long disappeared. Later on, I hired some people to renovate this residence and also hired a few housekeepers. When I came back a few years ago, I could still see some old people, but not necessarily now. Let's go, it's getting dark. Strange, why isn't it dark yet? I can't see anyone. Song Ying looked at the entrance of the village and saw an archway with the words Song Village written on it. Grandpa, do the people here all go to bed so early? Song Tianyu said, Villagers work at sunrise and rest at sunset. It's normal for them to go to bed early. But it's indeed a bit early today. At this time, Song Howren gave a signal with his eyes. A strong man in a black suit beside him nodded and quickly walked into the village. When he walked out of the archway, a group of people happened to arrive at the archway. The strong man came back with an old man. Master, there seems to be a situation. I've brought someone back, the strong bodyguard said respectfully. When the old man saw Song Tianyu, he was startled at first. Then, he took 2 steps closer and opened his eyes forcefully. His vision seemed to be a bit blurred, probably because his eyesight had deteriorated. The old man said, Are you Master Song? The master of Song family's big house? Song Bo? Song Tianyu frowned. Obviously, he recognized the old man. Are you Song Bo? It's me. The old man patted his chest and gave a thumbs up. Master Song still remembers me. Song Tianyu smiled. Of course I remember. You were there when the house was being repaired. I even had dinner at your house. Later, I came back several times, but I didn't see you. How are you? Are you in good health? Good, good. I can eat and sleep well. I also drink a few ounces of white wine every day. Song Bo patted his chest and said, I went out to make a living for more than 10 years. I came back 2 or 3 years ago. I'm old and can't walk anymore. I'm waiting for death here. Song Tianyu patted the old man's shoulder and said with a smile, You're still very strong. It's too early to say that. By the way, I just came back. Let's talk on the way. You come with me and tell me about the village. Just now, my people said that there's some situation in the village. What happened? Song Bo looked hesitant at this time. He seemed to be a little afraid. He looked back at the village and wanted to say something. Song Bo, I'm also a member of Song family village. Song Tianyu said indifferently, I've also burned incense in the ancestral hall of Song family village. If there's any trouble in the village, I can't ignore it. If you have something to say, just say it. Is there any difficulty in life? Alas, Master Song, it's not a matter of helping or not. Song Bo shook his head. Some things can't be decided by money. Song Tianyu was stunned. Song Haoran smiled and said, Grandpa Song Bo, do you still remember me? Song Haoran, Master Song's son. Yes, yes, young master. Song Bo opened his mouth and smiled, revealing his few teeth. You've grown up. When I saw you last time, you were less than half of my height. Song Haoran smiled slightly. Yes, I've grown up. But not only have I grown up, but I've also become more capable. Master Song Bo, you just said that some things can't be decided by money. That's good. We can also decide things that can't be decided by money. If you have something to say, just say it. This. Song Bo hesitated for a moment and then looked at the people of Song family. Chapter 993. There were mountains, rivers, gods, and ghosts. It seemed to be a bad habit of a remote village, or an ancient superstition. Although Song Village couldn't be described as a remote village, it was still a remote place. In order to avoid war, the ancestors of the Song family deliberately chose this place far away from the secular world. Haunted. Song Haoran glanced at his family and raised his eyebrows. He looked into Song Bo's eyes and asked, How did it happen? Song Bo quickly said, At first, it started from the Wang village in the next ditch. After a while, it came to our village. Next ditch? Song Haoran was stunned and subconsciously looked at his father. Song Tianyu nodded and said, I remember there were a few families with the surname Wang there. Song Haoran nodded. Song Bo said nervously, That day, I saw that my hair was long and planned to find Master Wang at the entrance of the Wang village to cut my hair. I passed by a family who happened to be holding a funeral. I asked out of curiosity. Turned out that the whole family died. A family of 6 people, big and small, all died in one night. I heard that they died miserably. Aren't you guys evil? All died in one night. Song Haoran suddenly frowned. Yes, it was very tragic. Song Bo sighed. Speaking of which, I've seen the head of the family a few times. He was a blacksmith and had good skills in repairing iron pots for people. His name was Wang Das-hun. Sigh, he was quite young, in his 40s. What a pity. Since people died, didn't the local people come down to investigate? Song Tianyu asked in a low voice. They came, but they couldn't find anything. Song Bo then told the situation he had heard, but I heard that Wang Das-hun picked up 2 men from somewhere. One was injured and the other was unconscious. Not long after that, Wang Dashuan's entire family was dead, and the 2 people he had taken in were gone. The police in the village said that the 2 men might have killed them. They were wanted, but I don't know if they found them. Then, what does it have to do with ghosts? Song Bo said, A few days later, on the 7th day of Wang Dashuan's death, an old man went to the toilet in the middle of the night. He saw a white shadow floating out of Wang Dashuan's house and fainted in fright. When he woke up the next day, he said he saw a ghost. Since then, more and more people had seen Wang Das-hun at night. Some people even heard crying coming from Wang Dashuan's house in the middle of the night. One of the more courageous ones didn't believe it and went to the door in the middle of the night. As a result, he was found unconscious outside the house the next day. He didn't even know how he fell asleep. But since then, this guy has been crazy all day long. As a result, the whole ditch is in a state of panic. After pausing for a moment, Song Bo continued, then, a Taoist priest was invited back from somewhere to perform a ritual. In the end, Wang Dashuan's ghost was chased away and came to our Song village. Uncle Song Bo, are you saying that Wang Dashuan's ghost has come here? Has anyone here seen it with their own eyes? Song Haoran suddenly asked. Song Bo nodded hard. Of course. Many people have seen it, including me. It was probably last week. Someone was holding a wedding in another ravine and invited me over to set up a stove to cook. Because I came back late, I heard some strange noises when I entered old Master Song's ancestral home in the middle of the night. At that time, I drank a bit of wine, so I stealthily went to the front door to listen for a bit. I heard some very strange sounds like laughter. Then I touched the wall of your house and took a look inside. Oh my God, I was almost scared to death. What did you see? Song Ying swallowed his saliva and asked subconsciously. Song Bo's face was a little pale at this time. He swallowed his saliva and said, I saw a guy with disheveled hair and I couldn't see his face. He was lying on the ground, crawling and crawling. He crawled very fast. He didn't look like a human at all. Someone? Song Haoran grasped the key point. There was a ghost. Song Bo said in horror, I saw it with my own eyes. That ghost crawled and suddenly pounced, grabbing a mouse and stuffing it into his mouth. Oh my! The mouse's tail was still moving in the ghost's mouth. In the end, it was swallowed alive. He even smiled at me afterwards, which scared the hell out of me. I directly hid in my house and kept the lights on for the whole night, not daring to close my eyes. Since then, the poultry we raised here often disappeared. Everyone said that the ghost was hungry and came to steal in the middle of the night. Now, everyone doesn't dare to go out at night, afraid that the ghost will pester them. Look, during the day, everyone had a meeting in the ancestral hall, discussing how to invite a Taoist priest to come back and chase away Wang Dashuan's ghost. Otherwise, we can't live. Everyone looked at each other. If someone was so strange in the middle of the night, there might be other reasons, but ordinary people couldn't swallow a mouse alive. You said that this ghost is still in our ancestral house, right? Song Haoran asked again. Song Bo said, this. Young Master Song, don't tell me you want to go and take a look? Please don't. It's very fierce in the middle of the night. Why don't we go there tomorrow? If you don't mind, you can come to my house and stay for a while. I'll make room for you. We're just a couple. My son and daughter-in-law are working in the city. You can sleep anywhere. Song Haoran glanced at Song Tianyu, obviously waiting for him to speak. No need, Song Bo, Song Tianyu said indifferently. If I, Song Tianyu, want to go home, even ghosts can't stop me. Besides, as the saying goes, humans are 30% afraid of ghosts, but ghosts are 70% afraid of humans. We have a lot of people and abundant yang energy. We're not afraid of ghosts. Oh, Master Song, don't be so stubborn. Just wait for the night. Master Song. Song Bo called out, but Song Tianyu had already led them to the ancestral house of the Song family. He couldn't stop him at all. Song Bo glanced at them and saw that he couldn't stop them. He could only run back to his house resentfully. The ancestral house of the Song family in the Song family village wasn't small. Although the mansion in front of them had been abandoned for a long time, the 2 stone lions placed in front of the door still showed some of its former grandeur. It was just that the plaque in front of the door was tilted down. Song Tianyu glanced at it and slowly let out a sigh. Seeing this, Fifth Uncle hurriedly asked someone to straighten the plaque. Only then did the group push open the door of the mansion and walk in. There was a porch at the entrance of the mansion. More than 10 years ago, when Song Tianyu came back and rebuilt the ancestral house, he had people connect it to electricity and install a lighting system. The power switch was also set in the porch. But now that the power switch was turned on, there was no electricity. It was afraid that it had been too long since electricity was used, so it was automatically cancelled. It seems that the person who was hired to look after the house last time didn't do a good job. Song Tianyu shook his head. In fact, he had specially left money for the person who looked after the house. But he hadn't come back in recent years. That person took the money and didn't do a good job. It was possible that he even ran away. Old 5, take 2 people with you and see if you can find some candles or something. Song Tianyu thought for a while and said, I remember there's a utility room in the backyard. See if there's anything we can use. Let's stay in the front yard for now. Come, let's sit in the pavilion over there for a while. Song Tianyu reached out his hand and pointed. It was already night and the night was hazy, but they could still vaguely see a 4-cornered pavilion. Fifth uncle quickly brought 2 bodyguards over, while the rest of the bodyguards surrounded the gazebo and waited. Mr. 7 smiled and said, Master Song's people are indeed the elites of the elites. Just by looking at the momentum of these bodyguards, many elite battalions in the country may not be able to find one. Song Tianyu just smiled and didn't say anything about his own people. Instead, he asked, 7. Song Bo just said that this mansion is haunted, what do you think? This Mr. 7 wasn't from the Zhang family, but from Zhang Lilanfang's maiden family. But only Zhang Lilanfang was in charge of the 2 families now. Even so, the business between the Zhang family and the Li family was basically separated, except for the antique. Although the Zhang family was a secretive rich family, many people in the country still knew about it. And the Li family belonged to the secretive family, and they hid in the dark. After all, the Li family started from the dumping business, so they always kept a low profile and only did things that made money silently. Since the country opened up, the Li family's business turned to foreign countries. After all, the protection of cultural relics in the country had become stricter, and the tombs that could be dumped were almost all dumped in the past thousands of years. Even so, the Li family would occasionally find some cultural relics that were stolen during the war from abroad, and handed them to the country through different breakthroughs. Zhang Lilanfang used this method to maintain the good relationship between the Zhang family and the Li family in the country, and at the same time, she continued to promote the Li family's reputation, and those people in the government simply turned a blind eye to it. After all, Zhang Lilanfang lived in that era, and her husband made a lot of contributions in that turbulent era, even sacrificing his life for it. Coming back to his senses, Song Tianyu continued to look at 7, this expert who had dealt with all kinds of evil people for a long time. At this time, Achi was muttering to himself. He suddenly took out a palm-sized compass from his clothes and placed it on the stone table under the pavilion. Then, he began to mutter. It was the first time for Song Haoran and Song Ying to see this operation, so they couldn't help being interested. But Zhang Qingrui didn't seem to care when 7 took out the compass. She was absent-minded, and no one knew what she was thinking. Luoqia was looking at the depth of the Song family's ancestral house, revealing a trace of thinking. After a while, 7 said slowly, Mr. Song, we have a so-called dragon cave search in our industry. The dragon in it refers to mountains and spiritual veins, and the dragon is called Shinryu and fake dragon. In ancient times, many emperors and ministers had more than one tomb. This is the so-called real and fake tomb, in order to prevent later people from touching the real tomb and destroying Shinryu. As he spoke, Achi stood up and pointed at the mountains outside the mansion's outer walls. He said, Look, the winding and undulating mountain range outside contains a large amount of vitality, so the land here is fertile. Green mountains and beautiful rivers, this is definitely a true dragon. After finding Shinryu, we will find the resting place of Shinryu. The resting place is far from the dragon head, so this dragon is the dragon of riches. If a tomb or residence is placed on the dragon of riches, it will be a place full of vitality, and the future generations will have good fortune. Obviously, the Song family's ancestral house is on this dragon of riches. Looking at the direction of the structure and the meaning of the dragon cave, it seems that the person who built this house must be a master in metaphysics. Oh! Song Tianyu said, from what you said, not only is this not a haunted house, but it is also a blessed land? Seven nodded. Although the Song family has declined a few years ago, it has been blessed. After Master Song returned to the country, he ordered people to renovate the house. After that, the Song family's life has been smooth. It's wonderful. From what you said, if someone wants to deal with my Song family, they don't have to do it personally. As long as they destroy this ancestral house, then my Song family will be in danger, right? Song Tianyu looked at Seven and suddenly laughed coldly. Seven's heart trembled, and sweat seeped out of his forehead. He thought that this Song Tianyu was already over 60 years old, but he still had such a terrifying aura. He couldn't help but open his mouth, not knowing how to respond. He could clearly feel that there were several gazes filled with killing intent looking at him from outside the pavilion. He had heard of the legend of the iris flower. That was a terrifying person that directly overturned a small country. Zhang Qingrui smiled. Master Song, it's just a feng shui story. You can't take it seriously. Besides, no matter how good the feng shui is, it depends on the person. If the person in charge is just a good-for-nothing, no matter how much wealth there is, it will only dissipate. Only a smart and capable person can persevere. No matter how good the fortune of the ancestors is, it depends on the ability of the descendant. The Song family is thriving under your leadership. Even in the country, it's hard to find a comparable family. It's enough to show that you are a man of great fortune and great talent. Besides, as the saying goes, man can conquer nature. Master, didn't you walk all the way to today's success? Oh, you're really smart. At this time, Song Tianyu smiled and sighed. Big Sister Li is really lucky. After being praised by a girl like you, what else can an old man like me say? Master, you're still very healthy, Zhang Qingrui said softly. At this time, the light of a fire came from not far away, illuminating the crowd. Turned out that Uncle Wu came back with some people, with a torch in his hand. Master, I found some kerosene and some candles. It should be enough for tonight. Uncle Wu came back with the torch. Tomorrow, I'll ask someone to buy some more things, and see if I can connect the electricity. Song Tianyu nodded and stood up. Okay, let's go inside. It's cold outside. My old bones can't stand it. Grandpa, let me help you. Song Ying hurried forward. The crowd started to follow Uncle Wu into the mansion. At this moment, Luo Qiu suddenly looked at a big tree in the front yard. He saw something flash by at an extremely fast speed. Some were crawling, some were huge, and some had disheveled hair. They looked like frightened rats, and Song Haoran was also looking at them. But Song Haoran didn't expose it. He just patted Luoqiu's chest and made a gesture to keep quiet. Then he turned around and chased after them. Suddenly he laughed, shouting, "How about I tell you a ghost story tonight?" Chapter 994. They didn't find many candles. Of course, they were only limited for Song Tianyu and the others, as well as Zhang Qingrui. As for the bodyguards, they tried their best to squeeze in one room. Because there was no electricity, Uncle Wu could only ask the bodyguards to get some firewood and boiled some hot water for everyone to wash up and drink. Generally speaking, it was enough to cope with the night. Song Haoran liked exploring and was used to living in the open, so he didn't have any objection to it. As for Master Song, he was also a man who had endured hardships before, so he was also calm. Song Ying didn't say anything. Such conditions were actually much more comfortable than the days she spent in the summer camp in the village when she was a child. Of course, she didn't train herself according to the standards of a soldier, but just learned some self-protection skills and survival skills in the wild. Zhang Qingrui was probably the one who was not used to it the most. After all, Zhang Lilanfang didn't use the Song family's methods to cultivate her descendants. However, Miss Zhang didn't complain even though she was not used to it, which made Song Tianyu quite admire her. Song Haoran just came out of the bathroom at this time, wiping his hair with a towel. Originally, he intended to invite Luochio to take a bath together, because it could promote the growth of affection and friendship between men. Unfortunately, Luochio refused him with a smile. What a pity, Song Haoran thought. As he walked while wiping his hair, and there was no light, Song Haoran accidentally knocked his head. It didn't hurt, but Song Haoran suddenly became absent-minded. In a trance, Song Haoran suddenly thought of one thing. When he came in, he and Luochio saw the creepy crawling shadow that Song Bo mentioned. Song Haoran knew himself well. Not to mention the Sun God's badge. He had encountered some weird things by chance during his years of exploration, so he could be careless. The key was, how did Luochio do it? What was even more inconceivable was that in that instant, no, in the period of time before he kowtowed, he actually subconsciously tacitly agreed to this point, and even felt that it was a matter of course. He directly accepted it, and he didn't feel anything strange. Why was that? Song Haoran stood alone in the corridor, and gradually became absent-minded. At this time, his shoulder was suddenly patted hard by something. It was a hand reaching out from the darkness. The hand belonged to Uncle Wu. Seeing Song Haoran standing here alone, he was a little curious, so he patted him lightly. Song Haoran saw Uncle Wu, who was holding a candle and a thermos bottle. "Uncle, what's the matter?" Obviously, the brave Song Haoran wasn't scared. "Master, I asked you what's the matter. Why are you standing here alone?" Uncle Wu frowned and asked. Song Haoran was startled, and said subconsciously, "Nothing, I was just thinking about something." Strange, what was I thinking about just now? He really forgot what he was thinking about just now. He was trying hard to find it in his mind, but he couldn't find any trace of it. But Uncle Wu was still here, looking at him strangely. Song Haoran smiled casually. "I was thinking about why Song Bo said it was haunted, but there's still no sound." "You're so mysterious." Uncle Wu shook his head helplessly. "Master, I don't want to chat with you. I'll bring some hot water to Master." "Go ahead." Song Haoran nodded. He watched Uncle Wu leave the corridor, then frowned and said to himself, "Strange. What was I thinking about just now? Why can't I remember?" With doubts, he didn't go to his room, but quietly climbed up to the roof and sat cross-legged. He had enough rest, and his spirit was full. At this time, Song Haoran fully opened his perception. The structure of the entire Song family's ancestral house began to gradually appear in his mind. It was a three-dimensional picture of the building lines. The same three-dimensional picture of the building lines appeared in front of Luochio. To be exact, it appeared on the table in his room. Luochio walked around the table, then put his hand into the three-dimensional picture of the lines, and touched several different places. After that, he didn't continue to pay attention to it, but walked out of the room. On the way, he met several patrolling bodyguards of the Song family, but Luochio's passive skill was fully activated, so even if the bodyguards passed by him, they didn't notice his existence. Maybe it was just a small stone on the road, maybe it was just a weed. They definitely wouldn't think that this was the Master Chiu of the Song family. Later, Luochio came to the backyard of the Song family's ancestral house. Although it was called a backyard, it was very spacious, with rockery, fake woods, and small bridges. Although it had been abandoned for a long time, he could still see some of its former grandeur. Luochio walked slowly, and stopped in front of an old well. He looked around, and saw a shadow flashing in the trees around, like a monkey playing a prank in the forest. Suddenly, something approached Luochio from behind, and a rustling sound came from the grass. Luochio calmly turned around, and saw that behind him, there was a crawling figure that he saw before. Both arms pressed on the ground, elbows raised high, like the forelimbs of a spider. His clothes were tattered in many places, His hair was disheveled, and his face was clean. His eyes emitted a ferocious light like an untamed beast, and his throat made a low growl, like the language of a beast. When Luaccio turned around, he stopped, looked vigilant, and bared his teeth. "Do you really think of yourself as a beast?" Luaccio suddenly looked down at the man crawling on the ground, and said. But he did not respond. He only opened his mouth, and let out an even deeper and more penetrating sound of a wild whisper. "We've met before, do you remember?" Luaccio slowly squatted down. It should be 2 times. The first time was in a small antique auction. The second time was in your master's Taoist temple. At the same time, Luaccio slowly stretched out his finger to his forehead, and gently touched it. "Remember." Hearing Luaccio's voice, his ferocious expression gradually calmed down. Violence could indeed change a person's appearance, making him terrifying. When the violence faded away, the person would not be so terrifying anymore. If the dirt on his face was removed, then under the dirt, there would probably be a delicate and pretty face. Jean Eyre. This beast-like thing turned out to be the disciple of Taoist Yang Taizi, a little Taoist with a childlike heart. "You are," when his eyes became clear again, he looked at Luaccio in confusion, and then fell asleep, and then fell on the ground. Only his back was vaguely shining with golden light. It was a strange imprint on the skin on Jean Eyre's back, very much like the scribbles those Taoists would write on yellow paper. Luaccio glanced at it and felt something special. He intended to reach out and touch it. Most of the time, when he couldn't see through the true thoughts, he could only use the most primitive way to feel it through direct contact. But when Luaccio was about to touch the mark on Jean Eyre's back, a deep and cold voice came from behind. "Don't move. Don't move him." Luaccio stood up. The voice continued to sound behind Luaccio. It seemed to come from the ancient well. "You guys who cultivate Taoism in vain, don't you care about the heart of heaven, earth, and human?" The voice was weak and faintly trembling. "Can't you have a good rest since you're injured like this?" Luaccio turned around and said casually, "Mr. Momo." The dark clouds moved away quietly, and then the moonlight shone brightly. The moonlight scattered in the winter night. For ordinary people, this weak light was not enough to see anything, but for Momo, he could see the appearance of the person before him clearly. He opened his mouth, somewhat puzzled but more surprised. It's you, Senior." It turned out that this was the strange Senior who had discussed the fickleness of people's hearts with him at the seaside of Louis village. It was also because of that discussion that Momo had finally received a rare enlightenment after traveling for a long time. During his cultivation journey, he had obtained an important sublimation. If this sublimation had not strengthened his Tao cultivation heart and increased his dermic powers, he would not have been able to bring Jean Eyre out of the battle of Mount Tai. Even though he had been in a sorry state, that had been under the eyes of many Tao world seniors. "Actually, I should be younger than you," Luaccio suddenly said. Momo was startled, and then he shook his head, saying, "First comes first. What's more, Momo will never forget Senior's kindness, so it's not wrong to call you Senior." Luaccio did not dwell on this topic. He glanced at Momo's current appearance, which could be described as miserable. His lips were dry and blue. His chest was wrapped in a large piece of gauze, and there was even blood oozing out. The blood was slightly black. "You seem to be poisoned?" Momo coughed twice and then said with a bitter smile, "Yes, I'm poisoned. I didn't expect to be poisoned by those self-proclaimed righteous Tao experts. The coldest thing is the human heart. Senior, you're right, as long as one's heart is cold, it will be cold when it should be cold. Let me take a look." Luaccio walked to Momo and said softly, "Give me your hand." Momo was in a very bad state now. Even if a person from the Tao world, who was much weaker than him, came, he could only sit and wait for death, let alone this Senior who he could not see through. Therefore, he extended his arm almost without thinking. He was subconsciously very willing to believe this Senior, thinking that he had no intention of coveting the emperor's edict that everyone was fighting for. Luochu then covered Momo's palm with his palm, and then he closed his eyes. At this moment, Momo only felt that the stagnant and weak feeling in his whole body was slowly disappearing, and the poison that suppressed his dermic powers seemed to be disappearing bit by bit. He felt his own changes in disbelief, and at the same time, he stared at this senior's expression. He did not feel strained at all. He actually removed the poison that was difficult to remove in his body so easily? All right. When Luochu opened his eyes, Momo already felt that his whole body was unobstructed. Although he was still tired, he was extremely relaxed. At this moment, Luochu took away his palm, and a black bead the size of a longan also left with his palm. This was the polymer of the poison that was extracted from Momo's body. No matter how you deal with this poison, it should pollute the environment, so just leave it with me? Luochu suddenly said. Momo nodded blankly. Luochu then conjured a small box and put the poison inside. Momo did not know how this senior took it out and sent it away. Perhaps it was the legendary heaven and earth spell in the sleeve? Senior, thank you for saving my life. Momo cupped his fists. I can't express my gratitude. If you have any orders in the future, as long as it doesn't violate morality, Momo will not refuse. It's better not to make such a promise. Luochu shook his head. Momo gave a start again. Luochu said again, since you can't do it easily, why should you make a promise? As long as it doesn't violate morality, Momo will go through water and tread on fire without hesitation. The young Taoist master of Dragon Tiger Mountain said with a firm gaze. However, Luochu said, if you want something, then you need something. If the need can't be used, it's beyond the boundary of morality. If you only need one thing, then, should I repay your kindness or not? Senior, I don't need your help. Luochu shook his head again. Besides, this kind of promise is precious because it's given. But if you add conditions to the promise, it's no different than not accepting it. Momo kept silent for a while, finally exhaling heavily. Senior, thank you for your advice. It's not advice, it's just my personal opinion. Luochu said indifferently, it has nothing to do with you, it's just that I can't accept it. People's hearts are complicated. You have a lot to learn and I have a lot to experience. No one is smarter than the other. Senior. But Momo didn't seem to give up so easily. Then, I'll put it in another way. I'll never forget your advice and kindness. No matter if you're good or evil, as long as you're in danger, I'll protect you with my life. That's too much. Luochu shook his head. Let's put it aside. Tell me what happened between you and him. Are the ghosts in Wang family's ravine and Song village caused by you? Chapter 995. The records of the Grand Historian recorded, in the 12th month, Wushua, Shangqin Chan Gaoli, Temple Hutu. There used to be a grand temple in Haoli Mountain, also known as the Sunluo Temple. Later, in the tomb-suppressing certificate unearthed from the tombs of the Eastern Han Dynasty, there was a saying, living people belong to West Chang, undead people belong to Mount Tai. The god of Mount Tai was in charge of life and death. At the Mount Tai railway station, Momo, who was carrying 2 bags of luggage, was carefully looking at the travel map he bought after getting off the train. Although there was a Penglai conference every 10 years in the world of cultivation, it was always his master who participated in it. Now, Momo was a greenhorn and this was his first time here. He had only heard about many things from his master and had never experienced it himself. Therefore, he was somewhat nervous. Well, there's a tour bus over there. That's good. Momo checked the route and said, Jean-Eyre, we don't have time to sit down and eat. How about buying some dry food and eating on the bus? Jean-Eyre. Jean-Eyre? But the little Taoist, who followed Momo from Senior Yang Taizi's place, was gone. This made the young Taoist master of Dragon Tiger Mountain anxious. If he lost him, he didn't know how to explain to his master's good friend, Senior Yang Taizi. Momo subconsciously opened his bag and took out a paper crane. Dragon Tiger Mountain had a lot of Chiman Dun Jia techniques, including the method of searching for people. However, the railway station was crowded, so Momo was in a dilemma. It would be very troublesome if people saw it. In the current era, the Dao world was different from the previous era. People in the Dao world were detached from worldly affairs and the imperial court couldn't control them, but now, the control was quite strict. First, because of the prosperity of science and technology, ordinary people could easily obtain the power to deal with Taoist cultivators. Compared to these mass-produced scientific products, the Dao world that needed to be carefully selected to find a successor was really powerless. Besides, it was the era of humanity. After the war, Xian country was protected by great luck. No matter if it was the once prosperous demon world or the long-established Dao world, they had to be careful. When Momo went down the mountain, he got a travel permit from his master. This permit came from a department in charge of management in the country. As for why the people in the Dao world and the demon world who possessed many Dharma spells had to accept such management, it was naturally because this department had a power that both the Dao world and the demon world had to fear. This was because the Shinryu of Kelowna, the protector of Kelowna, was the highest advisor of this department. Fortunately, Momo soon found Jean Eyre. Although Momo had experienced Jean Eyre's temper along the way, he still had an indescribable feeling when he saw Jean Eyre squatting in front of a goldfish stall. How on earth did Senior Yang Taizi raise him? 10 yuan for one. Buy 5 and get a free fish tank. The boss rubbed his hands and looked at Momo. Last 5. Momo shook his head. At this moment, Jean Eyre, who was hugging his knees, suddenly raised his head and blinked his eyes, making Momo feel a little weak. How could he have such sparkling eyes, so dazzling? I know. Momo couldn't help sighing. I can only buy one, there are too many. I know, buy all of them. Finally, Momo gave in. In fact, it wasn't the first time that he succumbed to Jean Eyre's sparkling eyes. At this moment, after selling the last goldfish, the boss started to pack up the stall while Jean Eyre held the goldfish tank, looking quite happy. You're satisfied, but do you plan to carry this goldfish tank all the time? Momo said grumpily. It's not troublesome. Jean Eyre smiled. Momo was going to say something, but at this moment, he suddenly felt that someone was approaching him on purpose. And there was more than one. Jean Eyre, come to me. Momo frowned, saying in a low voice. At the same time, he grabbed Jean Eyre's arm and walked quickly to the crowd. However, before he took a few steps, the road in front of him was blocked by a man in a black suit. Momo stopped. At this moment, not only in front, but also in the back and left, there were men in the same suit. In the blink of an eye, he and Jean Eyre were surrounded by these 4 men. Friend, I don't think I know you? Momo glanced at them and sneered. The man in front of him suddenly put his hand into his clothes. This action made Momo vigilant. However, to Momo's surprise, this man didn't take out any weapon, but a phone instead. The man glanced at the phone and said, You're Mr. Momo, right? You're the representative of the Celestial Master sect from Mount Longhu. You are. Momo was surprised. The other party said faintly, I'm Ling Feng, you can call me Captain Ling. This is our ID, we're from the Land Management Bureau of Special Countries. Momo gaped. He already knew where these people came from. The so-called Land Management Bureau of Special Countries was the Russian special department that supervised the Dao world and the demon world. Oh, is that so? Momo nodded, saying, But even if you're from this department, I didn't do anything bad and didn't cause panic among the people. Even if you're from this department, you don't have a reason to block me here, do you? Ling Feng smiled faintly, saying in a neither servile nor overbearing tone, Mr. Momo, we don't mean to block you. The reason why we appear in front of you is just to better manage this Penglai and maintain the order during this conference as the meeting affairs. Momo opened his mouth, wanting to say something. Ling Feng said directly. In fact, we've already prepared accommodations for everyone. So this time, we're here to invite Mr. Momo. Has someone already moved in? Momo thought for a while. Ling Feng said politely. In fact, Mr. Momo, you should be the last batch of participants. Big sects such as Wudong, Qinqing Mountain, Chuanjin Sect and Jingyi School have also moved in. Momo took out the ID and carefully compared it with the steel seal on his pass before nodding. Okay, please lead the way. This way, please, we've prepared the car. Momo and Jean-Air quickly followed Ling Feng and got on a domestic Hongqi car. They set off from the railway station and soon came to a villa. Momo inquired about a lot of things along the way. For example, in Mount Tai, there was a villa specially built for people from the Tao world to attend the Penglai conference. It was built after the founding of the country. However, the Penglai conference was held every 10 years and this villa was used for the 8th time. Crouching Dragon Villa. The destination that Ling Feng led them to. Not far away, about 4 or 5 kilometers away, there was another villa called Kuanping, which was specially built for guests from the demon world to gather and live. Congratulations to the success of the Penglai Tea Party and Health Forum in XX World. When he saw such a banner hanging in front of Crouching Dragon Villa, Momo finally spat out the curse he had been suppressing in his heart for a long time. This was totally different from the grand event held every 10 years in the Tao world and demon world in his imagination. For example, when Ling Feng led them to the prepared rooms, Momo saw such a scene when they passed by a conference room. On the stage, a man in a gray robe was holding a microphone and holding an electronic pointer, pointing at a sentence in quotations of absolute truth that was projected on the screen. Below the stage, a group of guys in colorful clothes were immersed in taking note. This scene made Momo stand stupidly in front of the conference room for more than 10 seconds. Taoist friend, if you're interested, please come in from the back. There are still seats in the back, so don't disturb everyone, okay? The man in a gray robe said with a smile. Sorry to disturb you. Momo closed the door of the conference room immediately. If it was somewhere else, Momo might think that this was a scammer's trick. However, he could clearly feel that the magic power in this meeting room was surging. There were at least 3 fellows whose magic power was not weaker than his. At this moment, Ling Feng said, Mr. Momo, it's fine if you want to listen to the lecture. Anyway, your check-in is done. This is your room card. No need. I'll go back to my room first. Momo shook his head. I want to be alone. Where's your companion? Ling Feng looked around in surprise and found that the young man who was following Momo with a goldfish bowl had disappeared. Momo acted as if he didn't find it strange. He didn't know why either. Jean-Air's cultivation was clearly very low, but he was always able to silently escape from the lock of his aura. Sorry, my companion is a bit playful, I can't watch him. Momo smiled bitterly, but he usually won't go far, so he should still be in the villa. That's not good. Ling Feng said worriedly. Mr. Momo, you know that the guests aren't ordinary people. Some of them have weird tempers and rules. Even we have to be careful. Let's look for him, he should be nearby. Momo said helplessly. In fact, Momo found Jean-Air quickly in the ornamental garden of the villa. When Momo and Ling Feng found Jean-Air, they found that he was squatting in front of a small lotus pond in the garden, pouring the goldfish into the pond. Why did you run away without saying anything again? Momo knocked on Jean-Air's head. But this guy only giggled. It was really hard to be angry with him. What are you doing here? Momo sighed, seeing Jean-Air's action. He was puzzled. Didn't you just buy them? Don't you want them? Don't buy them if you don't want them. It's hard to make money, brother. Jean-Air said, and I don't want them, let them stay here. Why? Momo gave a start. Jean-Air blinked, saying matter-of-factly, because this place is much bigger than the fish tank. You? Momo frowned. You didn't plan to let them go at the beginning, did you? Jean-Air nodded. looking at those goldfish swimming away. He supported his cheeks with his hands. I feel that they are happier now. They are happy, Momo said with a pained expression. Jean-Eyre suddenly asked, Brother Momo, why did the boss catch them and sell them? Doing business to make money. Momo said subconsciously, if someone has this need, someone will do it. If someone likes to raise goldfish, there will be someone who sells goldfish. Everyone takes what they need. Isn't that normal? Jean-Eyre was puzzled. But if so, goldfish also have needs, then who will satisfy them? Goldfish. Momo frowned. How can they be compared with humans? They don't have intelligence, only simple instincts. They don't have needs, nor do they need anyone to satisfy them. Besides, even if they have their own thoughts, no one will care about it. And don't you like catching crickets? Have you ever thought about whether those crickets are willing to do it? I let them go in the end. Jean-Eyre tilted his head, and I asked them, they were willing to play with me. So I caught them. You asked? Momo was startled. It seemed that there was something important that could be dug out if he wanted to study it. Yes, what's the problem? There seemed to be something unusual about Jean-Eyre. It was reasonable to say that his intelligence was normal, but he was like a child who didn't know anything at this age. It was unknown what method did Yang Taizi use to teach him. But Ling Feng was behind them, so Momo didn't intend to ask further. No problem, let's go in. The rooms have been arranged for us. Okay. Jean-Eyre nodded, standing up and suddenly asked, Brother Momo, if one day we become goldfish and are caught to sell, will they not care about our feelings? Are you stupid? Who will catch people to sell? It's not a slave society now. Besides, we can't become goldfish, and goldfish can't become us either. Jean-Eyre said, But didn't you say as long as there's a need, someone will do it? Since some people like to raise goldfish, why don't they like to raise humans? If someone likes to raise humans, will we be caught and thrown into the goldfish bowl? And then no one will care about us? Chapter 996. What kind of person would be able to capture someone, throw them into a goldfish bowl, and rear them? This is a very strange and paradoxical question. At first glance, it seems to be a very strange question. But Momo and Ling Feng fell into contemplation because of Jean-Eyre's question. Humans feed humans, humans eat humans. Is there such a fish tank in the world? This thought appeared in their minds like a lightning bolt that they couldn't avoid in time, making their scalps numb and sweating profusely. Momo's magic power suddenly went out of control, crashing around in his body. His face turned red, blue, and pale, and his body trembled slightly. Great Tao is formless, giving birth to heaven and earth. Great Tao is emotionless, moving the sun and moon. All of a sudden, a low voice approached from afar. This voice was reciting a heart-calming sutra that was widely circulated in the Tao world and known by everyone. I don't know its name, but I call it Tao. Tao has clear and turbid movement and stillness. Heaven is clear and earth is turbid, heaven moves and earth is still. Amidst the chanting of the scripture, there was also the crisp sound of a bell. The ringing of the bell made Momo's uncontrollable magic power gradually return to its original trajectory, as if it had found a guide. Descending to the end of the stream, giving birth to all things. Clear is the source of turbidity. Movement is the foundation of stillness. If people can be peaceful, heaven and earth will return. At this moment, Momo and Ling Feng both exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, and their breathing became smooth again. He saw a very young man, but his hair was already gray. If his hair was black, he would be about 21 or 22 years old. Young man with gray hair? This young man was holding a small ringing bell, which should be the source of the ringing of the bell. Thank you. Momo cupped his fist and said gratefully to the young man. He knew that he was in a dangerous situation because of Jean-Eyre's carelessness. If it wasn't for this white-haired young man's help, the consequences would be quite troublesome. It's nothing, I just happened to pass by and saw that you two weren't in good condition, so I recited a meditation sutra. This young man smiled faintly. If you two didn't have a good foundation, you wouldn't be of much help. No matter what. Momo shook his head. Ling Feng was very respectful at this time. He looked at the young white-haired man and quickly said, Representative Lai, why did you come out? Lai what? Momo was stunned and subconsciously looked at Ling Feng. As a member of the relevant department, ordinary people naturally could not manage the Tao world and the demon world. Therefore, Ling Feng's cultivation level was actually not weak. At least, Momo could sense that his force fluctuation was not weaker than his own. At this moment, Ling Feng said with a serious expression, This is the current successor of the cloth sect. He's also one of the representatives of the National Tao Association's committee. Even the National Tao Association has appeared. You guys are really keeping up with the times. Momo didn't know where to start ridiculing. But he had heard his master mention the way of cloth from him. There was only one successor in each generation, and every Penglai tea party. No, the sacrificial ceremony at the final stage of the Penglai conference was hosted by the Bai sect. Due to the uniqueness of the way of cloth, most people in the Tao world were very respectful to the successor of the way of cloth, who didn't want the way of cloth to help them. This should be the successor of Dragon Tiger Mountain. Representative Lai looked at Momo and said with a smile, You're Momo, right? You know me? Momo said in shock. Representative Lai nodded and said, I haven't seen you in person, but I've seen some photos. Your master, Taoist Long He, often sends some photos of you practicing in the group, so the Taoists in the group know more or less. I see. Momo nodded and then suddenly said in shock, Wait, what did you say he often does? Send photos. Representative Lai said, In our official chat group. Oh, you haven't been added, right? Momo's mouth twitched and he said reluctantly, I've heard of this official chat group, but it seems that only the sect masters of each sect can join. Plus, the criteria to join the group is quite strict. I'm still far from it. But that old pervert, he actually secretly sent a picture of himself in the group. But? Representative Lai blinked curiously. Nothing. Momo hurriedly shook his head. Anyway, thank you for your help this time. I'll remember this favor. If you need any help in the future, feel free to find me. Maybe. Representative Lai smiled casually, but you better be careful these days. These days? Just be careful. Representative Lai didn't say much, but looked at Jean-Eyre. But Jean-Eyre only looked at the bell in Representative Lai's hand curiously and didn't care about Representative Lai's gaze at all. Representative Lai suddenly said, You think the goldfish will have more freedom since the pond is bigger than the fish tank, right? Jean-Eyre nodded. Representative Lai said, But have you thought about it? The goldfish are safe in the fish tank. They don't even need to worry about food because the person who raised them will feed them regularly. But it's different in the pond. They might not be able to find food and will starve to death without food. Jean-Eyre gave a start, blinking his eyes and looking at the pond. Representative Lai didn't stop there. Instead, he continued, Let's say that there are other fish besides goldfish in the pond. Big fish eat small fish. It's very possible that these small goldfish are hungry and before they can find food, they will be eaten by the big fish. But why do they always bump into the fish tank? Don't they want to come out? Jean-Eyre asked confusedly. Representative Lai said indifferently, Won't the goldfish swim to the edge of the pond? As long as there's a boundary, there'll be an end. They will swim to the end of the pond. Then, how many differences are there between the fish tank and the pond? They just jump from a small fish tank to a bigger fish tank. Jean-Eyre kept silent. Representative Lai suddenly smiled, but there's a fish tank that has no end and boundary. Do you want to know? Jean-Eyre raised his head, nodding forcefully. Representative Lai walked to Jean-Eyre, stretching out his finger and nodding on Jean-Eyre's chest. Here, The fish tank has no end. Jean-Eyre subconsciously looked at the place where Representative Lai was pointing, asking confusedly, "You mean, my chest?" Representative Lai smiled without saying anything, then picked up the bell in his hand, saying pleasantly, "Do you like this? Take it." "No, you can't," Momo hurriedly said. The shadow of this thing could guide the chaotic spiritual power in his body. It must be a precious magic tool. Although he and Jean-Eyre didn't belong to the same sect, Yang Taizi entrusted it to him temporarily, so Momo felt he could be regarded as a temporary guardian. "It's just a small toy." Representative Lai smiled easily. "I bought it from a stall at the railway station. Don't worry about it." After that, Representative Lai placed the bell in Jean-Eyre's hand. Then he looked at Ling Feng and said, "Tonight, I have a meeting with the Demon Realm's representative. We'll discuss the following matters. I'll go back and prepare first. Captain Ling, take good care of these two Taoism friends." "Got it, Representative Lai, I'll do my best." Ling Feng stood straight. Until Representative Lai left, Momo slowly let out a sigh as if he had just woken up from a dream. He's young, but his cultivation is so high. I thought I was one of the best in the younger generation, but it seems I was too arrogant. Of course, Captain Ling Feng said with admiration, there's only one successor in every generation of the Linen sect, only one in 100 years. Only one in 1,000,000 people is qualified to inherit the Linen sect. I heard Representative Lai experienced 99 previous lives in one night, and his hair turned white overnight. Finally, he opened the heaven's heart and became the successor of the Linen sect. "What's his name?" Momo suddenly asked, asking for the name of the most powerful one among his peers. "Lai Kaixing." Ling Feng arranged a good room for Momo and Jean-Eyre. Momo, who had just taken a shower, was making a phone call, swearing, "You old pervert, how dare you take photos of your disciple and use it to flood the group? Go to hell." Momo was so angry that he threw the phone on the bed. On the other bed, Jean-Eyre was playing with the bell that Lai Kaixing gave him. Momo said grumpily, "Jean-Eyre, have you done your homework today? Your master asked me to supervise your practice, don't be lazy." "Okay," after Jean-Eyre responded lazily, he slowly sat up cross-legged. But Momo knew that once Jean-Eyre meditated, he would fall asleep within 10 minutes. Therefore, it wasn't easy for him to finish his homework. He needed to be supervised all the time. He looked at Jean-Eyre, suddenly recalling the words he said by the pond. Momo couldn't hold his curiosity, asking, "Jean-Eyre, you said you can communicate with animals and hear their words?" "Yes." Jean-Eyre opened his eyes, nodding. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Momo sat down. "Master told me not to let others know, so I didn't tell them." Jean-Eyre said. "But didn't you tell me?" Momo frowned. "Oh right. I forgot. Shit." Jean-Eyre hurriedly covered his mouth with his hands, looking at Momo nervously with his eyes wide open. Momo could only rub his forehead, letting out a sigh. "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone about this, including your master. You don't need to cover yourself." Jean-Eyre patted his chest, letting out a sigh of relief. Momo asked curiously, "Are you born with this ability or acquired later in life? Did you practice any special martial arts?" "I've been able to hear since I was young." Jean-Eyre smiled. "When I was living in the woods, I could hear it. At that time, many animals in the woods would tell me where the tasty fruits and spring water were, so I wouldn't starve." "Woods? You grew up in the woods?" Momo was surprised. Jean-Eyre nodded. "I don't remember many things. My master told me that he found me in the woods and took me in because I was pitiful." Momo lowered his head, not knowing what he was thinking. Not long after, Momo suddenly stood up, walking to the luggage area and opening the suitcase. There was a brocade box given to him by Yang Taizi. Before leaving, Yang Taizi told him to open it when he arrived at Mount Tai. On the way, Momo had studied this brocade box out of curiosity and found that there was a curse seal on it, but this curse seal had already disappeared, as if the time had been calculated. Momo opened the brocade box, finding there was a smaller box, about the size of a palm, with a note. Momo glanced at the words on the note, opening his mouth slightly, showing a weird expression. He frowned, putting the small brocade box into his pocket quickly, looking at Jean Eyre. "I have something to do, I'll go out for a while." Saying this, he rushed out of the room. But after a few seconds, he turned back, staring at Jean Eyre. "Remember to finish your meditation homework, I'll bring you some food when you come back. Got it? Okay, be careful on the way." Momo hesitated for a while, but he was still worried, locking the door from the inside. Although Jean Eyre was also a member of the Tao world, he usually neglected cultivation, so his Dharma power was almost non-existent. At most, he was healthier than ordinary people, so he shouldn't be able to come out. He hurried to complete the instruction on the note left in the brocade box. Give the thing to the people of the cloth path. That was to give it to Lai Kai-shing. Momo didn't expect that he would meet the current successor of the cloth path again so soon. Bang! Perhaps because he was absent-minded, Momo suddenly bumped into something. It was a girl, a little younger than him, about 18 or 19 years old. She wore a purple leather coat, and her hair was also white, but it wasn't gray like Lai Kai-shing's hair, but silver. In addition, she was carrying a painting tube on her back, and chewing a bubble gum. The moment she landed on the ground, the bubble that the girl blew out also burst. Although she looked a little strange, Momo didn't pay too much attention to it, considering that this place wasn't an ordinary place, but a gathering point of the Tao world's members. Perhaps she was the successor of some strange Tao world sect. Didn't he also dye his hair blonde? Who didn't have a special hobby? Sorry, I didn't mean it. I was just a little anxious. Are you okay? Momo reached out, wanting to pull the girl up. But the girl just shook her head and stood up. She didn't say anything and just walked past Momo. Momo shook his head, muttering, "There are so many strange people here." However, just as Momo planned to continue on his way, he suddenly frowned, because he found that the small brocade box he was carrying was gone. Chapter 997. Fellow Taoist, have you ever seen a strange and shameless female thief? Fellow Taoist, have you ever seen a very cute and shameless female thief? Fellow Taoist, have you ever seen a very cute boy thief? Oh, a boy? Momo subconsciously looked at the gorgeously dressed Taoist. This was the third person Momo had met who had stolen something after he had discovered that his small brocade box was also missing. It seemed that a thief had sneaked into the Crouching Dragon Villa at some point in time. She had disguised herself as a harmless person and stolen everywhere. Currently, she had succeeded many times. It was not easy. After all, almost half of the Tao world's elites had gathered in the Crouching Dragon Villa, yet this female thief had succeeded repeatedly. Therefore, many people in the Tao world were speculating whether this female thief was the successor of the star-plucking tower that had disappeared for almost 100 years. Who knew whether the star-plucking tower existed? At this moment, Momo only felt anxious. After all, the stolen item did not belong to him but was entrusted to him by Yang Taizi. If it belonged to him, Momo would not be so agitated even though he was unhappy. He was very afraid of feeling like he had let someone down. He was very afraid of not being able to fulfill his promise to someone. Fortunately, this was the Crouching Dragon Villa, where people from the Tao world live. Therefore, there was no problem of ordinary people seeing her using Dharma spells. In fact, many people from the Tao world had started to use all kinds of strange methods to search for this nameless female thief who had sneaked into the villa. Paper crane, go! At this moment, a yellow paper crane slowly flew out of Momo's palm. The Celestial Master Sect's orthodox Dharma spells were good at searching for people. However, Momo felt that this group of people from the Tao world, who were also searching for the female thief, did not seem to have a simple purpose. Thus, he did not make it public. However, thinking back, while staring at the paper crane flying slowly in the corridor, Momo muttered to himself, If it is common for ordinary people to be robbed by pickpockets, then it is somewhat inexplicable that the people of the Tao world would be robbed as well. Cultivators had Dharma powers and their six senses were much stronger than ordinary people. Therefore, this female thief had some strength? However, if he dared to steal from a place like the Crouching Dragon Villa, it would not be a normal prank. He must be a repeat offender. Thinking about it, Jiha suddenly stopped in front of a heavy door. Momo paused. Jiha was directly destroyed by someone, and he himself was stopped by Captain Ling Feng, who had picked him up at the train station. "You are Mr. Momo?" Ling Feng frowned. "Mr. Momo, what's the matter?" "Entry is temporarily prohibited because several representatives of the Tao Association are currently discussing activities with the guests of the Demon Association." The Demon Association. As expected, there was a Tao Association. Holding back his sarcasm, Momo told Ling Feng the whole story. Ling Feng frowned. He was the one in charge of guarding the Crouching Dragon Mountain Villa, so he couldn't absolve himself from the blame if something happened here. White hair, 18 or 19 years old. Ling Feng thought for a while. Most of the guests who stayed in the hotel were received by people from our bureau. I don't think I have any impression of such a person. Could it be that he came here by himself or just arrived today? Momo asked. Ling Feng shook his head. That's impossible because we've reported all the participants. The number of disciples and the leader of the team are clearly recorded. Even Mr. Jean Eyre, who came with you, we've contacted Taoist Yang Taizi and got his confirmation. Momo stroked his chin. That is to say, she's just a non-staff member. Then, is it possible that she's not a human? You mean, she's a guest from the demon realm? Ling Feng frowned. I need to confirm this. Because the Koan Prung Villa is led by another captain. It's better to be faster. Momo nodded. This female thief has succeeded so many times, it shows that she's very skillful in stealing. God knows how many people will be harmed if she keeps on doing this. Wait for a while, Mr. Momo. Captain Ling Feng nodded. At this moment, the door of the conference room suddenly opened. A dignified woman in formal clothes with her hair tied up walked out. Captain Ling Feng, what happened? I just felt the fluctuation of supernatural power outside the door. Who's this? The dignified woman looked at Momo at the same time. Ling Feng hurriedly said, Miss Gong, this is Mr. Momo, the successor of Taoist of Dragon Tiger Mountain. He's here to attend the Penglai conference on behalf of Taoist Changhe, the headmaster of Dragon Tiger Mountain. There's just a small problem, don't worry. Oh, he's the disciple of Taoist Changhe. The dignified woman named Miss Gong nodded, suddenly asking, You're Momo? This Miss Gong is the successor of Taisu Palace. She's temporarily the secretary of the Taoist Association. Ling Feng briefly introduced the background of this dignified woman. Oh, it's the orthodoxy of Zhenwu Great Emperor. Sorry for the disrespect. Momo hurriedly cupped his fists to greet her. The orthodoxy of Qiyun Mountain and Dragon Tiger Mountain both belonged to one of the 4 holy lands of Taoism in China. Though they didn't have direct contact with each other, they were bound together by the common people long ago. Miss Gong suddenly asked, Mr. Momo, do you have time? What's the matter? Momo didn't answer but asked back. Miss Gong said, We just happen to need a volunteer, and it would be better if it was someone who cultivates a protective cultivation technique. I think the god-beating skill of Dragon Tiger Mountain is a better choice. Of course, volunteer is the principle. Momo hesitated, suddenly asking, Is the successor of Lini's sect in there? Representative Lai? Miss Gong gave a start, then said, Of course he is. It's okay to be a volunteer. But before we start, can I have a private talk with him? Momo requested. After all, the thing was stolen. Momo felt it was his responsibility to let the successor of Lini's sect know. He didn't intend to hide it. After the thing was found, he would pretend it never happened. Besides, since Yang Taizi ordered him to give it to the successor of Lini's sect, he should know what was in the brocade box and whether it was important or not. Please wait for a moment. Miss Gong didn't say anything more, walking directly into the meeting room. Mr. Momo, Representative Lai agreed. Please come in with me. Miss Gong walked out again quickly. Momo heaved a sigh of relief, then looked at Captain Ling Feng. Captain Ling, please forgive me for the thing I mentioned to you just now. Don't worry, we'll deal with it as soon as possible. Ling Feng glanced at Momo gratefully. After all, he didn't mention the thief in Crouching Dragon Villa in front of Miss Gong, giving face to his department. Miss Gong looked at them strangely, but didn't say anything. Instead, she led Momo into the meeting room. When Momo stepped into the meeting room, he felt several sharp gazes falling on him, making him feel a great deal of sternness. He took a deep breath, looking around. The guests from the Tao world and the demon world were now sitting on two sides of a long meeting table. Actually, he saw Lai Kaixing at first glance and found that he was sitting on the third seat on the left. Generally, in such meetings, the seats were arranged according to status. It seemed that Lai Kaixing's status in the Tao Association was quite high. Momo felt a vast Dharma power fluctuation from the two people who were ranked above Lai Kaixing. They were even more terrifying than his master, Taoist Changhe. As for the people on the right, they were obviously the representatives of the Demon Association. However, Momo rarely met the Demon Clan since he came down the mountain. The few times he met, he only met some disobedient little demons. He dealt with them casually without saying anything to the local administration. Unlike the solemnity of the Tao Association, the representatives of the Demon Association were much more casual, with various kinds of clothes. Some of them were even very young. Momo glanced at the nameplate in front of the 5th Demon Association guest, who looked like a young girl. Greedy Wolf Clan's Purple Star Young Master. At this time, Lai Kaixing suddenly stood up. Everyone, please wait for a moment, I have something to say to this volunteer. No one had any objection, so Momo was quickly taken to a small room in the meeting room. Lai Kaixing smiled. Mr. Momo, what can I do for you? Not knowing why, Momo had a feeling that Lai Kaixing had already known. He couldn't help saying awkwardly, Senior Yang Taizi asked me to bring you something. However, it was stolen on the way here. I'm really sorry. I know. Lai Kaixing nodded. I've taken it with great effort. That thing isn't important, and it will come back to me soon. Don't worry too much. This is calculated? Momo looked at the confident Lai Kaixing in amazement, frowning subconsciously. Lai Kaixing smiled. We call ourselves the Plain-Clothes Tao, so we have some skills. Let's not talk about this for now. Let's talk about this experiment. I heard from Miss Gong that you've agreed, right? Momo nodded. Lai Kaixing said, then I'll tell you the cause and effect. This time, we're testing a strange drug called Heaven's Tears. And the developer of this Heaven's Tears belongs to a secret organization in the West. Secret organization? Momo gave a start, muttering, I've heard from my teacher that there are supernatural organizations in the West, such as the Magician Association, the Church, and the 13 Clans. Yes, there are those old organizations that have been passed down since ancient times. Lai Kaixing nodded, and this time, the developer of Heaven's Tears is an organization called Michael Club. Michael Club? Yes. Lai Kaixing nodded. This club can be traced back to 100 years ago. 100 years ago there was a great war in the West. After the war, the number of supernatural talents in the West withered, almost suffering a devastating blow. Over the past 100 years they only recovered a little. And this Michael Club appeared after that war. Momo listened attentively. At this time, Lai Kaixing said, for the past 100 years, the Michael Club has been absorbing talents in different fields and roping in a group of powerful transcendents. According to our intelligence, there are the so-called 12 immortal generals in the Michael Club. Every one of them is a dangerous person with powerful strength and personality defect. In addition, they have different degrees of infiltration in science and technology, economy, medicine, and even politics. It can be said that in the past, there has never been an organization like the Michael Club that has such a long reach. Momo was surprised. There's such a huge organization? Lai Kaixing said seriously, yes. Originally, this organization was only active in the West. But after a few years, we found that they seem to have extended their hands to our country. We have to be careful. Momo nodded in agreement. Then what's this Heaven's Tears? Lai Kaixing continued. This drug is developed by Michael Club. Strictly speaking, it's a drug that can make people go berserk. Ordinary people who take Heaven's Tears will quickly consume their chi, blood, and life in exchange for a short burst of power. As for the burst of power, it can make ordinary people fight against weak low-class demons. There was an insurmountable gap between ordinary people and demons, but if there was a drug that could make ordinary people directly jump to the fighting power of low-class demons, we're discussing this matter. Lai Kaixing said helplessly, but the Demon Association doesn't seem to believe it. They even suggested that we send out a person who has taken Heaven's Tears to compete with the person they sent out. Momo frowned. Isn't this request too much? Lai Kaixing said helplessly, although we signed the agreement under the leadership of that great man 70 years ago, 70 years have passed. But after all, 70 years had passed, and the demon race had been in a bad situation recently. As for the Tao world, there have always been many who like to suppress the demon clan. In short, you can take this as an excuse for the demon clan to vent their anger. Of course, there's a certain danger in using Heaven's Tears. First, I have to explain this to you. But don't worry, everyone here has Tao skills and divine powers, so they'll definitely protect you. Momo thought for a while and nodded. After all, I'm a member of the Tao world. Since this matter involves so many people, Momo naturally can't decline.